The children of the three families of the empire were born from generation to generation with special abilities. The Earl family possessed abilities related to the knowledge of the world. Erebos family renowned for their exceptional swordsmanship and martial arts. The last Leroy family was known for having abilities in a wide variety of fields. However, Letitia, the eldest daughter of the Leroy family, was broken alien and was unable to awaken any ability. Tall and not short, there was nothing special about her, but she was just cute. Unfortunately, Letizia was not as good as Diana, and certainly not as smart as Emile, and he wasn't at all skilled with a sword unlike Xavier. Not as talented in magic as Irene, but she never felt envious of her siblings' abilities. She, on the contrary, was proud of them, so it was a blow to her to learn that her entire family was ashamed of her existence. This happened when they decided to abandon her. She was in shock, as her family just abandoned her. The man said angrily that today she was no longer his daughter and she should not dream of going back. He left and slammed the door in front of her with anger. She was shocked because she did not expect betrayal from her family. She couldn't get her head around the fact that they had abandoned her, so her whole world collapsed in an hour. Everyone admired the members of the Leroy family. Everyone heard that they all had excellent abilities. But still, everyone whispered since they had an only daughter who had no abilities. Everyone present knew that it was very strange, but they didn't want to pay any attention to her. She knew that it wasn't her fault. The man sighed heavily, as it seemed to him that she was not their daughter. Madame sighed heavily and said that fortunately one way or another they had other children. Letizia in turn sadly asked her parents for forgiveness. The man was furious and asked his daughter if she really had no abilities at all. He shouted that even something useless would do for them. She sighed heavily and asked for forgiveness. He was furious and asked if she could stop apologizing. He sighed heavily and said that every time he saw her, he was upset. He understood that she was a complete disappointment. Madame asked her husband to restrain his emotions a little because soon there would be a celebration on the occasion of their other daughter's birthday. Letitia was in shock. She was puzzled because no one even paid any attention to her. She remembered that when she was little, she would run to her father with a joyful smile. She ran closer to him and said with a smile that today was her birthday. He looked at her with cold fury and said that she was no longer a child, but she was still worried about her birthday. The young lady was puzzled and at the same time upset as she wanted to receive parental love. Unfortunately, Letitia now understood that she would never receive love from her parents. She understood that if she had abilities like the rest of her family, her parents would not have hated her. She knew that then her younger brothers and sisters would not ignore her. She wanted her sister to pay attention to her because she wanted her love. She was puzzled because she knew it was all her fault. A moment later, she was taken aback and looked into the distance as she heard someone walking. Diana looked at her sister casually and asked if she could step aside. Letitia was taken aback as she did not expect this. Diana looked at her coldly and asked if she knew what was standing in her way. Letitia looked away from her sister and asked for forgiveness because she didn't mean it. Diana looked at her sister with cold fury and contempt and asked how long she intended to disgrace them. After all, she was the only one in their family who had not awakened her abilities, and there were rumors that she was an illegitimate child or a cursed child. Diana looked at her intently and asked her angrily if she was sure she was flying with her that she had no abilities. Letitia was shocked and didn't know what to answer. As she left, Diana casually told her sister to get out of the way. Diana turned around and looked at her sister with fury and contempt, saying that she was still pathetic. Some time later, the maid came to her mistress and called her with a joyful smile. Letitia sighed heavily and looked sadly at the maid. Mary reported that the mistress had made her favorite tea. Letitia sighed heavily and told the maid that she didn't want anything today. Mary looked at the lady as she was very surprised by her gloomy mood. Looking at the lady, she asked if something had happened, but the young lady in turn did not answer. She remembered how her father had furiously reproached her for being useless because she had no abilities. Her mother said that fortunately they had other children for whom there was hope. Her sister said that she was miserable and all of this hurt her. She sighed heavily and asked the maid why she had no abilities. Mary began to calm the lady and thereby wanted to pull her out of the abyss of sadness and despair. She knew that all her brothers and sisters had abilities, but she did not. She was puzzled because she did not understand why she was the only one who did not have them. She always thought about this, so she wondered why she was so strange. She remembered how, where she had said with fury that she was pathetic. Mary said to the lady with a gentle smile that perhaps she did not yet know about her abilities. The young lady in turn sighed heavily as she realized that the maid was reassuring her. Letitia sat up and asked her maid how her brother was doing. Mary sighed heavily and said that he was getting neither worse nor better. Looking at the lady, she said that the doctor said that he needed to try another medicine, but it was too expensive. Letizia presented her maid with some jewelry, but the maid quickly refused as she knew that the Marquis would be displeased. Mary accepted the lady's care with a smile and said that it was enough for her that she and her brothers were worried about her. The young lady looked intently at her maid, but a moment later Mary said with a joyful smile that she wished money would fall from the sky. She smiled and said that in that case, she would have taken them. Letitia smiled and said that it would be faster to collect money on the street. Looking out the window, Letitia told the maid that she had better hurry and leave before it got dark. The maid said that she still had time. Letitia told the maid to leave quickly as she was worried about her brother. A moment later, Mary thanked the lady and said she was leaving. A few minutes later, Mary was taken aback when her mistress called her. Letitia, with a joyful smile, told her maid that she really hoped she would find money on the street. Mary smiled a radiant smile and told the lady that she was very sweet. Sometime later, the young maid slowly left the estate. She sighed heavily as her thoughts were completely filled with the kind and cheerful lady, but a moment later the young maid was taken aback as she found a gold coin. She looked at the coin closely from all sides as she wanted to make sure that it was really gold. A moment later, she remembered the young lady who had hoped she would find money on the street. Mary sighed heavily and was taken aback as she hoped that it was just a coincidence. Some time ago, a young lady sat and watched intently as a young man exercised. He said with a joyful smile that he would definitely become an imperial knight. Letitia said with a joyful smile that she would do her best to keep her fingers crossed for him. She hoped that he would pass the exam to become a knight of the imperial palace. She knew that as a bride, she had to support him. A moment later, she asked her maid to hand her the handkerchief. The young maid at the same time was absorbed in her thoughts about yesterday's discovery. So while doing her work, she did not hear her mistress, but still she threw all thoughts away and answered her mistress. A moment later, Mary handed her mistress a small handkerchief. Some time later, Letitia leisurely walked downstairs and ran into her sister. Diana looked coldly at her sister and asked where she was going. Letitia sighed heavily and said that she would like to see Levian. Diana looked at her intently and asked why she was doing this. The young lady looked at her sister in bewilderment as she did not understand the purpose of such a question. But a moment later, Diana looked at her sister with fury and asked why she needed to go to him. Letitia looked at her sister in bewilderment and asked if it was strange to go to support him. Diana in turn looked at her sister with a grin as she was about to support the young man. Letitia looked after her sister in bewilderment as she did not understand what was happening to her at all. Sometime later, she was quietly driving to her fiancé, but she still thought about her sister as she seemed strange to her. A moment later, she got out of the carriage and looked around carefully, as she did not know where the young man was now. Sometime later, she walked around the area looking for the young man. But after some time, she found him and called him with a smile. He looked at her coldly and asked what she was doing here. Letitia looked at him with a smile. A moment later, she ran up to him and said she wanted to cheer him up. Levian looked away from her and said that she shouldn't have come. She was surprised, but a moment later said she was very sorry if it had been a burden to him. Letitia looked at him intently and said that she would leave immediately, but he turned around and did not answer. Levian slowly walked away from his bride while she ran after him and asked him to stop. She took out a small handkerchief that she had specially embroidered for him, but unfortunately she was not sure that he would accept it. Letitia looked intently at the young man and said that she would like to give him a gift. Without looking at her, the young man asked if she was talking about abilities. She looked at him in bewilderment. A moment later, he turned around and coldly asked if she had awakened her abilities yet. The young lady was taken aback, but still asked him for forgiveness. Since unfortunately she did not have the ability, Levian looked at her closely and said that it looked like she had a lot of time to spare. He snatched the handkerchief from her. She hesitated and froze in place. A moment later, he said that he was already leaving. She was surprised. He looked at her with fury and asked if there was any reason why he should stay here any longer. Letitia was shocked, but she understood that everything was correct because she was a bride who had not yet awakened her abilities. Previously, he greeted her with a radiant smile. The young lady in turn was upset and confused after a small quarrel with her fiancé. Unfortunately, she collided with the young man. She was taken aback and, opening her eyes, asked the young man for forgiveness. Letitia looked in surprise at the young man, who was no less surprised. She said she had not looked ahead. A moment later, she looked at his hand in surprise as she noticed blood. The young man asked if she was okay. She said she was fine, but quickly asked if he was hurt. He sighed heavily and said that he was fine and he was glad that she wasn't hurt. With the speed of lightning, he turned around and said that it was time for him to go. She knew that she couldn't leave him like that. A moment later, she shouted at her, asking him to stop. She handed him the handkerchief and said that although it was only unsightly, she would like him to accept it. The young man froze for a moment in surprise. A few minutes later, he took the handkerchief and thanked her, but decided to hide it. Letitia told the young man that she gave him a handkerchief to wipe away the blood. He said that it would be an insult to her because it was her precious scarf. The young lady was shocked because she did not expect to hear anything like this. A moment later, she laughed and said he should take it. She slowly wrapped it around his hand. The young man was puzzled as the handkerchief was now dirty. Letitia, with a radiant smile, assured the young man that everything was fine and he did not need to return the scarf. She looked at him with a joyful smile and said that it would be better for him. The young man called his turn was surprised, but at the same time he wanted to know her name. She smiled and introduced herself. He froze for a moment at her radiant smile. He trained hard some time ago, but everyone said he got used to it quickly. They said that he was only a formal duke by status who had not gone through the succession ceremony. They all whispered to each other as they knew it was difficult to call him a duke when he had not gone through the ceremony, and his family did not even have money. The first time he took the exam, the Duchess died. The second time, relatives came and made a scene. They wanted to know how he would fail next time. The young man, in turn, was puzzled because he knew that he was unlucky. Lost in his thoughts, he returned home. But a moment later, he accidentally collided with a young lady. He was surprised and could not utter a word when she offered him her handkerchief. He said that if they use it, it will immediately get dirty. Letitia smiled at him radiantly and said that she did not need her scarf. He was stunned because she decided to help him. He asked with a smile if he could know her name. He was surprised when she introduced herself easily, but still he was very glad to see such a beautiful smile in the middle of a gloomy day. Sometime later, he took his knighthood exam. Everyone was surprised because he passed the exam even though his arm was injured. Sometime later, Mary greeted her mistress with a joyful smile. She was alarmed when she saw blood on the lady, but the young lady assured her that she was fine. It was not her blood. Mary breathed a sigh of relief and told the Yulita that she would wash her handkerchief. Letitia in turn thought for a moment as she handed over her handkerchief. She remembered the young, handsome man who was worried that he might ruin her scarf. Letitia told the maid that she had given her handkerchief to someone who needed it more. She also told the maid that she needed to take care of a gift for Diana in advance. The maid wanted to know what her mistress intended to give her sister, but told the young lady that it was a secret. The next day, everyone happily congratulated the young lady on the holiday. Diana smiled and, looking at everyone present, thanked them for coming to her party. At the same time, Letitia was walking around the hall as she wanted to find her sister. A moment later, she looked at her sister with a joyful smile and called her. Diana looked coldly at her sister and asked what happened. Letitia smiled and told her sister that she wanted to wish her a happy birthday. A moment later, Letitia handed her sister a small gift she had prepared, and Diana froze for a moment. Everyone looked closely at the young birthday girl as they wanted to see her gift. The young lady in turn slowly opened the small box and saw a beautiful, precious gift. The lady looked at the birthday girl in surprise and said that something similar had been popular many years ago, but they still said that the brooch was beautiful in its own way. The madam looked at the young lady and said that she could prepare another gift, since last time the girl said that her brooch was very beautiful. Diana remembered the beautiful red brooch and with a smile said that it was truly beautiful. She thanked Madame with a smile and said that she would take care of her. Letitia, in turn, was a little upset. Diana looked intently at her sister. A moment later, she smiled and said that she would like to take the gifts to my room with her sister. She thanked everyone with a smile and wished everyone a pleasant time, and after a few minutes, she went into the room with her sister. A moment later, they entered the room, Letitia looking warily at her sister. Diana looked at her sister with fury and said that next time she should not give anything. Letitia was in shock. She was talking about her sister, that it was her birthday, and she wanted to give her a gift. Diana was furious and shouted at her sister that she could have given her something else because she didn't understand who wore such things in their day. She said about her sister that this was not a gift, but bad taste, so she asked her sister not to come to her birthday party next time. Letitia was shocked because she knew that they were family. She asked her sister how she could not congratulate her. Diana looked at her sister with a smirk and asked if she hadn't brought enough shame on her family already. Diana said that if her sister didn't have abilities, she should at least be sensible because today she wanted to disappear into the ground after the gift. She looked at her sister intently and said that she was ashamed to accept such a gift. The Marquis looked closely at Mr. Seos and greeted him, thanking him for coming to the celebration. Seos asked Mark with a smile and how he could not come to the party since today was his precious daughter's birthday. The Marquis smiled and called his daughter, said to the gentleman that he would like to introduce her. Diana smiled and introduced herself. The Marquis glanced sideways at Letitia and said that she should say hello too. A moment later, Letitia greeted the gentleman, but after a few minutes she apologized and said that she wasn't feeling very well. The Marquise was furious because she didn't even deign to celebrate her sister's birthday properly. The young lady was puzzled by her father's words, but she did not respond. Diana asked her father if she could leave as she wanted to enjoy her day a little longer. He smiled and said that of course she could leave. At the same time, the gentleman looked intently at the girls. A moment later, he told the Marquis that he seemed to care very much for his second daughter. The Marquis said that Diana had saved his family. Seos asked the Marquis what was wrong with Letitia. The Marquis said that she was upsetting him because she still didn't have abilities. The man thought about it and he knew it was strange. He knew that their family had long been a famous family in his various fields. He asked if his daughter had not yet awakened her powers. He understood that he would have to talk to the girl later. It was a long time ago their new business failed when the Marquise was pregnant, and now the Marquis was in a difficult financial situation. To make matters worse, after the Marquise gave birth to Letitia, she was diagnosed with infertility. But at some point business began to flourish, and the brand was able to regain its health. Their family was able to recover with ease. The Marquise wondered when everything had started going so well. Then he decided that everything started and was good from the moment when Diana was born. The Marquis knew they were lucky to have Diana, and he was always grateful for her birth. Seos asked the Marquis what abilities his daughter possessed. The Marquis happily said that she could make a flower rain, and it was truly a beautiful and breathtaking sight. Seos said that he found his eldest daughter very sweet and kind. The Marquis knew that she was of no use because she had no ability. He knew that whether she had abilities or not, she was still his child, but in the eyes of the public, she didn't look very good. Seos Sil, is the Marquis really going to break off his daughter's engagement? The Marquis said he wouldn't call it a divorce, but that Diana would be the bride. Seos was shocked and asked the Marquis what if the child did have abilities. He told the Marquis not to believe what he saw before his eyes. Seos sighed heavily and said that he had arrived after a long time and that it would be a shame to just sit around. He told the Marquis that he would like to look around a little himself. The Marquis suddenly became thoughtful and remembered the moment when his daughter Letitia was born. Then the Marquis informed him that they had received a letter reminding them of the debt. Sometime later, he rejoiced because Diana was born safely. After her birth, their business began to recover. He thought about it as he knew he would have to talk to the Marquis because he intended to break off the engagement with Letitia and betroth the young lord to Diana. The next day, sitting at the dinner table, the Marquis asked Diana how her birthday had been. She smiled and said that she had spoken with Levion over a cup of tea. He asked if she had spoken to the Marquise. She said that he had given her a gift and said that he was very sorry because he could not come to her birthday. She showed them the bracelet he had given her with a joyful smile. They had a cheerful, casual conversation for a while, with Letitia being the odd one out between them. She was shocked that her fiancé gave her sister a gift, but she couldn't tell them anything. A moment later, she stood up and asked for forgiveness, as she was a little tired and would like to leave them first. The Marquis looked intently after his daughter. A moment later, the Marquis asked his daughter what she thought of the young lord. He looked at her closely and smiled as he wanted to know what she thought of him as a marriage partner. Everyone was shocked, but the Marquis said that he was going to talk about calling off the engagement. He wanted to propose an engagement to Diana. Diana was shocked, but at the same time very happy to hear the news. At the same time, the young lady was returning to her room, but she felt somehow uneasy. Diana met her sister and asked with a grin where she was going. Letitia said that she had a meeting with Levian. Letitia looked at her sister in surprise and asked why she was laughing. Diana came closer to her sister and said with a smirk that she felt sorry for her. Diana looked at her sister intently and told her not to make that expression. She looked at her sister with a fierce mockery and said that she really hoped that she would have a good time. Letitia was taken aback for a moment and froze in surprise as she did not understand what was happening at all. Sometime later, she entered the room where her fiancé was. He, without looking up at her, said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Letitia smiled and asked how he had chewed all this time. While sipping his tea, he casually said that he had nothing new. She wanted to ask the young man why he saw her sister sucking, as it upset her a little. After all, she really wanted to be with him. But after a while, she changed her expression and asked with a smile how his training was going. He sighed heavily and said that she, as always, behaved carefree. He asked if she knew what was happening in the family now. He looked at her intently and said that their families were currently discussing breaking off their engagement. She was shocked. She didn't understand what he would say, but he said that if she had nothing more to say to him, then she should go home. Letitia looked at Levian in surprise and asked if he agreed with this. Levian sighed heavily but said nothing. She remembered the fun times they had and how he smiled radiantly at her. But a moment later he sighed heavily and, sitting up, said that they were no longer at the age to play childish games. Levian looked at her sharply and said coldly that she should keep that in mind. With tears in her eyes, she looked at him and asked what she should understand. As he left, he said that it would be better for them to separate. Everything she had refused to accept fell into place in an instant. She was shocked because she realized that she was the only one who didn't know anything. This fact shattered her into pieces. Sometime later, she was returning home and nervously thought over everything that had happened. But after some time, she decided to go to the square. As she got out of the carriage, she noticed how happy everyone was. She looked into the distance in surprise as she saw a merchant who was offering everyone to try their luck. Letitia thought for a moment, as she had played the game often before. At the same time, the young people asked their brother to give them money so that they could play a game, but he said that this was a common trick. Letitia slowly approached the young people and said that if they didn't mind, she would take the ticket. A moment later, the young man turned around and froze in surprise, seeing a familiar person. The young lady in turn looked at the girl with joy and quickly grabbed her coin. Enoch sighed heavily and asked the young lady for forgiveness, as his younger children were simply unbearable. She smiled and said she was very glad they had fun. Letitia looked closely at the young people and told her companion that he seemed to get along well with them. Enoch looked closely at the young lady as he could see that she was upset about something. A moment later, he said that unfortunately his greeting was late. He leaned closer to her with a smile and asked her permission to formally introduce himself. He smiled a radiant smile and said that he, Duke Enoch Achilles. She looked at the young man shyly and introduced herself again. He smiled and said that he remembered her name. A moment later, he asked why she didn't play it herself. She said she wasn't lucky, but the people around her were good at that kind of thing. A moment later, the young men shouted to their brother that they had won a sack of flour. The young people froze in surprise for a moment. Letitia looked at the young man with a smile and said that she did not expect that his brother and sister would be among such people. He looked at her with a smile. At the same time, turned to her sister. They looked at each other. Leah looked closely at the young lady and with a smile introduced herself according to all the rules of etiquette. And a moment later she said that her twin brother, John Achilles, was next to her. Letitia looked at the young people with a smile and said that she was very glad to meet them. Leah, with a joyful smile, grabbed the young people by the arms and said that this was fate and they should have fun together. Sometime later, they were walking around the city and enjoying the day. At the end of the day, Leah told the young lady that she had had a fun time and therefore invited the young lady to their mansion. Jan told his sister that the young lady would be poisoned if she ate what she cooked. Leah was furious. He said that the sister should not burden the young lady Letitia. In turn, shouted that this was not at all burdensome. A moment later, she looked at the young people with embarrassment. Enoch looked at the young lady with a joyful smile and said that they would be looking forward to seeing her. Letitia looked closely at the young man and thanked him with a smile. Sometime later she returned home, and the smile did not leave her face as she had not had such a good time for a long time. In turn, she also wanted her family to greet her with a joyful smile. She would very much like to have a family as close-knit as the Duke's. A moment later, she finally returned home and sighed heavily as her family was here. The next day, the Marquess asked his daughter why she had gotten involved with such an unlucky ducal family. The Marquise told his daughter that from now on, she must ensure that nothing so useless reached his ears. She would have liked to object, but the Marquise said that if she could not help her family in any way, she should not cause problems. She remembered the Duke, who with a joyful smile said that they would be glad to see her at any time. She remembered his radiant and warm smile that he gave only to her, so she did not want to stop communicating with him. Sometime later, the young lady met Lord Seos. Seos smiled and apologized for calling her so unexpectedly, as he wanted to talk to her about something. Letitia looked at him in surprise, as she did not understand what he wanted to talk about. He looked at her intently and said that what they would talk about was her abilities. She looked at him in surprise and said that he might not have heard about the rumors. Seos looked at her and said that if she closed her eyes, this world would cease to exist. He said that he was very old, so it was difficult for him to stand on his feet for a long time, and so he invited her to sit down and talk quietly. Letitia looked at him intently and said with a smile that everyone already knew that she had no abilities. She said she was just unlucky, but it was more than just bad luck. He asked since when she had been unlucky. Letitia said that she didn't know exactly, but she thought it was since she became more aware. He said that there were many developed and talented people in her family, and often the abilities were very useful. He said that if everything was as she said, then she should not have woken up, because it could be that she had already woken up. She was shocked because she didn't expect to hear anything like that. She looked at the man intently and said that he had to tell her everything. He asked for forgiveness because he could not know for sure. He was shocked because he saw that the general neglect of those around him had driven the child to despair. The young maid watched them closely, but unfortunately she heard almost nothing. Some time later, the young lady was leisurely making her way around the kitchen. She was deep in her thoughts, so she didn't hear anyone. Mary came closer to her mistress and called her several times. Mary looked at the lady intently and said that she was simply too loud to be reached and asked her not to think too much in the kitchen. A moment later, they were looking at the baked goods with joy. After some time, the young lady said that she would take the cookies to the boys. Letitia was happy to go to her sister because she wanted to treat her to some cookies. A moment later, she looked into the distance with a joyful smile as she remembered her brother. After some time, she entered her brother's office and called him. The young man looked at his sister in bewilderment. She said that she baked cookies because she knew that he loved desserts. The young man, without taking his eyes off the documents, said that he was a little busy at the moment. She smiled and apologized for distracting him and said that she was already leaving. A moment later, she froze in place in thought because she knew that she shouldn't be upset. She decided to go to her sister since she loved sweets since childhood. Letitia was walking slowly down the corridor when she suddenly saw her sister. She called her with a smile. Irene, in turn, looked at her sister with bewilderment. Letitia smiled and told her sister that she wanted to treat her to some cookies. Irene looked at her sister intently and said that she didn't like figs and cookies. Letitia was surprised, but a moment later the girl shouted to her sister that she didn't like it. As she ran away, she asked her sister not to bother her with such trifles anymore. At the same time, the maid found her friend and shouted that she had been looking everywhere. She looked at the girl in bewilderment and asked what she was eating. The hungry moose's maid said that the young master had given her the cookies. The maid told her friend with a grin that Letitia's abilities had awakened, and her abilities were transferring misfortune to a person. Sometime later, the young lady was walking leisurely in the garden as the weather was very fine. But after some time, she looked at the pigeons in surprise as she did not understand why they were flying so low. She looked at them in surprise as she didn't know what they were eating. But a moment later, she froze in shock as they ate her cookies that she had baked earlier. She was slowly walking back into the room when she suddenly froze as she heard the maid saying that she brought bad luck and that they should avoid her. Letitia was sure that there were also good days that she spent with her family. Only now she was confused as everyone was avoiding her. She froze when she came to the estate. Lael, looking out the window, told her brother that a young lady had come to see them. A moment later, they came down to the young lady and ran towards her with joyful smiles. Leal pounced on the young lady and hugged her tightly. Letitia was shocked because she did not expect this. Leal told Letitia with a joyful smile that she had come to them, and now she was very excited. Leal told the lady with embarrassment that she missed her very much. Letitia smiled and said that she had promised to come and visit them. Leal smiled and grabbed her friend's hand and told her to follow her. Jan sighed heavily and asked his sister where she had taken the young lady. Leal told her brother to stop chatting and investigate after them. Letitia looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if she would really cook herself. Leal smiled and told the young lady not to worry, as she was sure she would like everything. Letitia looked with a tender smile at the young people who were arguing cheerfully. Letitia smiled and told the young man that his sister really wanted to cook something. Jan looked at the girl intently and said that if she felt uncomfortable or burdened, she should tell him. He smiled and said that his sister was a little rough but very sociable. Letitia looked closely at the young man and said with a smile that she felt a little awkward but was very happy. She looked intently at the young lady and said that on the contrary she was grateful to her. She knew it had been a long time since anyone had done anything for her. He smiled and said he was worried because she had a confused expression on her face. She thanked him for his concern. A moment later, she was staring at her brother and sister who were doing something in a hurry. Letitia looked at the young people with a smile and said that she would like to join them as she was bored sitting around doing nothing. A moment later, they were happily preparing the pie. After the pie was baked, brother and sister argued among themselves about who did what. Enoch entered the kitchen and asked in surprise what they were doing there. The young lady was taken aback and turned to look at the young man. She greeted him with embarrassment. He smiled and said that he was still waiting for her to come to them. Enoch said with a joyful smile that he really wanted to see her again. The young lady was confused and at the same time surprised, as she did not expect to hear such a thing. He smiled and said that he needed to return something to her. She was very confused because he wanted to give her something back and also wanted to see her again. A moment later, she simply fell down from such embarrassment. The young people were shocked and ran to her in a hurry. After some time, they were carrying the apple pie to the dining room. She looked intently at the young people. After a while, the young lady froze in place. She wondered what if the Duke didn't like the apple pie. She remembered her sister screaming furiously that she didn't like it and wouldn't eat her cookies. Taken aback, she looked at the young man intently and said that he didn't need to force himself to eat the pie. Enoch, in turn, looked intently at the small piece of pie. Enoch looked at her and said that she had worked so hard to prepare it that he simply had to eat it. She hoped he would say he liked it. Letitia asked excitedly how he liked the pie. The young man looked at her with a smile and said that he was simply amazing. And he also asked if he could have another piece. She froze for a moment in surprise. Letitia was shocked because she remembered that her cookies had previously been thrown out into the street and eaten by pigeons. He looked at her in surprise, but she asked for forgiveness with tears in her eyes. She sighed heavily and said that she had not intended to cry at all. Enoch said with a smile that he had never tasted anything more delicious before. He said that they should eat pie together. Enoch looked at her with a smile and said that he could not eat if she cried. She did not want him to say such words because they disturbed her soul. A moment later, the young men entered the hall and saw that the young lady was crying. After some time, she calmed down and asked for forgiveness, as she had not intended to cry at all. Leal pounced on her brother and asked what he had said that made the young lady start crying. He sighed heavily and said, puzzled, that he had only said that the pie was delicious. Letitia sighed heavily and said that the gentleman had done nothing bad to her, and she herself suddenly began to cry. Letitia sighed heavily and said sadly that for some reason she felt calmer around them than with her family. She was very confused because she knew that her family hated her. The young people looked at her in shock, as they did not expect to hear anything like that. Enoch knelt down and, looking at the young lady, said that they would always be glad to see her, if, of course, she would come more often. He smiled and said that in that case he would cook something tasty for her himself. The young lady in turn froze for a moment in shock, as she did not expect to hear anything like that. He smiled a radiant smile and asked her not to cry anymore. She thanked him with a smile for such pleasant words. Ian looked closely at the young lady and said that she turned out to be a very good person. Enoch said with a gentle smile that he thought so too. He thought for a moment of the beautiful young lady. Some time later, Letitia returned to her home. She suddenly stopped as her father angrily asked where she had gone. He pounced on her angrily and asked why she had gone to the Duke again. The Marquise was beside himself with rage and shouted that he had warned her and said that she should not get involved with them. He shouted that this was the last warning. She froze for a moment, not knowing what to say. He looked at her with fury and said that if she spent time with that family again, she should be prepared to no longer be part of their family. Letitia was shocked. She wanted to object to her father, but it was all in vain. She was puzzled and did not understand why her father was so cold-blooded towards her. A moment later, she entered the room and froze in place. She looked at her sister in bewilderment, as she did not expect to see her. Diana sighed heavily and told her sister that just because it was her room didn't mean she couldn't come to her. Letitia looked at her sister in surprise and asked if she really had anything to say. On her nerves lately by communicating with strange people. Letitia looked at her sister in surprise, as she did not understand what she was talking about. Diana looked coldly at her sister and told her not to pretend that she did not understand what she was talking about. Letitia asked her sister in surprise if she was really talking about the Duke's family. Now Diana looked at her sister with fury and asked if she really had hearing problems. Letitia was shocked. Diana did not understand why her sister was messing around with people who had no money, no luck, and who could not do anything. Letitia was shocked and shouted at her sister not to say such things. Diana angrily shouted at her sister that in that case she should stop communicating with them. Diana told her sister that rumors had spread everywhere that the first daughter of the famous Marquis was hanging around with the damned Duke. Letitia was in shock. Diana furiously asked her sister if she realized how much their family's reputation was being damaged because of just one black sheep. She screamed that the Duke was simply using her. Letitia sighed heavily and told her sister that she could ignore her there, but she must not speak ill of people she did not know at all. Diana looked at her sister with fierce mockery and asked why she shouldn't say something like that. Letitia looked coldly at her sister and said that because the Duke was better than them, since they threw away what she made especially for them. Diana mockingly asked her sister if that was really the case. Diana told her sister that she heard she had made cookies for the rest of the family, but Diana in turn said that she wouldn't eat her cookies either. She looked at her sister with cold fury and asked how she could eat what she had cooked without knowing what she had put in it. Letitia was taken aback and looked at her sister in surprise, asking what she had just said. Diana mockingly asked her sister what that expression was on her face now. Diana asked her sister if she really thought they would take her cookies, say thank you, and happily eat them. She, mocking her sister, said that she felt very sorry for her. As she left, Diana looked intently at her sister and said that if she heard again that she had met with the Duke's family, she would immediately tell her father everything. Letitia looked intently at her sister but did not answer. Diana sighed heavily and told her sister that if she didn't want to be kicked out, she should be reasonable. The young lady was shocked because she did not expect anything like this. The next day, the maid looked closely at her mistress and told her that she needed to eat something as she had not eaten anything for almost several days, and if this continued, she would easily faint. Letitia sighed heavily and asked the maid for forgiveness because she had no appetite at all. Mary looked closely at the lady and said that the entrance exam was just around the corner. I looked at her in surprise, not understanding what exams she was talking about. Mary said she was now talking about the entrance exam for a knighthood. A moment later, the young lady slowly took out a small bracelet that she had made some time ago. Mary was amazed at the beautiful bracelet and the gold thread. Letitia said she did it because she had heard that it was a good thing to give to someone who was about to do something important, but she didn't know if she should give this bracelet to him who was still her fiancé. Mary looked at the lady with a joyful smile and told her that of course she should give it to him because he was her fiancé. The young lady sighed heavily but did not answer because she felt a pressure in her chest after the maid's words. Mary looked closely at her mistress and asked with a smile why she didn't take a walk in the garden today since many flowers had already bloomed. Letitia sighed heavily because she knew that a walk would not hurt her. Some time later, she was leisurely strolling through the garden and suddenly bumped into her brother. He looked at her in surprise as he did not expect to see her. Letitia smiled and asked how his studies were going and if he was having a hard time. The young man in turn screamed as if scalded and told his sister that he was very busy right now. Letitia looked after him with bewilderment as she did not understand why he was running away from her. She was puzzled because she saw that all the maids were looking at her sideways and trying to avoid her. She was in shock and didn't understand why everyone was avoiding her. Sometime later, the young lady sat and slowly sipped her tea. She said with a smile that today the smell was especially pleasant. The young lady looked intently at the maid and called her. Annie was taken aback and shuddered. Letitia asked the maid if something had happened to her as she had a strange expression on her face. The maid was puzzled and said that she was fine. A moment later, the maid told her mistress that she would be absent for a minute as she needed to complete an assignment that the Marquis had previously given her. The young lady looked in bewilderment at the maid who was running away in a hurry. She understood that everything was somehow very strange. Sometime later, she walked slowly down the corridor and watched the maids closely. They looked at her with distance. Letitia was puzzled because she didn't understand what was going on and why they were all avoiding each other. After some time, she saw her sister, who was frozen in the corridor. She looked closely at her sister and asked if she thought the maid was avoiding her. Letitia told her sister that if she knew anything, she should tell her. Irene looked at her sister in fear and shouted at her not to come near her. Letitia was in shock as she did not understand what was happening at all. The young lady shouted to her sister that she was afraid that something bad would happen to her if she talked to her sister. Letitia looked at her sister in surprise as she did not understand what she was talking about. Irene was shocked. She did not understand how her sister could calmly walk around with such abilities. The young lady was shocked because she did not understand what her sister was talking about. Irene said that everyone said that her sister's abilities were to bring misfortune. Letitia froze in shock as she didn't expect to hear anything like that. Irene shouted at her sister not to disturb others and that she should stay in her room. Letitia screamed that she had once said that she was less fortunate than others, but she had not said that anything bad would happen if they were near her. Irene told her sister that if she contacted her, it would only bring her troubles. Letitia was in shock. She screamed and called for her sister. A moment later, Emile came out to them. He looked at them intently and asked what had happened. The young lady in turn hid behind her brother's back with lightning speed. Letitia sighed heavily and asked her brother if he had heard rumors about her. She sighed heavily and said that something bad happened when she was around. He sighed heavily and said that he had heard about it. Trembling with fear, she asked if he also believed these rumors. Emile said that of course he didn't believe it, but she shouldn't put too much pressure on her sister. The young lady was shocked. She tried to object to his words, but it was all in vain. He looked at her intently and said coldly that their sister was scared. Letitia was taken aback and looked intently at her sister, who was frightened and trembling with fear, with tears in her eyes. She was shocked and wondered if her sister was really afraid of her. Letitia looked at her sister puzzled and asked for forgiveness as she had not meant to scare her at all. The young people looked intently at their sister but said nothing. At the same time, everyone in the estate was whispering as they said that the young lady had the ability to bring misfortune. They heard that she made everyone unhappy, so no one wanted to approach her. At the same time, the young lady sat quietly in her room. She was puzzled by everything that was happening, but did not know what to do. She was in shock and did not understand why everyone hated her so much. She was perfectly aware that this was not her ability at all. A moment later, she heard someone knock on her door. Turning around, she was surprised to see a man. Seos smiled tenderly as he looked at the young lady and said that he would like to talk to her if she didn't mind. Letitia looked at him in surprise, but still told him to pass. The man apologized for such a sudden visit. Sometime later, they sat quietly at the table and drank tea. He looked at her closely and said that because of the strange rumors she must be having a hard time. Letitia sighed heavily and said that she was fine. He looked at her closely and asked her what she thought of these rumors. He asked if she really thought she had the ability to endure misfortune. She sighed heavily, but a moment later looked confidently at the man and said that this was not so, and she was sure that her ability did not lie in making others unhappy. Seos looked closely at the young lady and said that he was very glad to hear this because he also did not believe in these false rumors. He smiled and asked, "How about Togo, in order to prove others wrong?" He said he was thinking about finding out what her abilities really were. Seos said that she didn't have to be seen as a sinner by others. He smiled and asked why she didn't get some fresh air. A moment later, the young lady said goodbye to her companion and asked him to be careful. Letitia, in turn, was grateful to the man since he was the only one who said that she was okay, so she was happy and knew that she should not be afraid. A moment later, she called her maid and asked if she could help her get ready. With lightning speed, the young lady went to the library. She knew that she needed to find out what her ability was. Letitia was sure that if her father found out about the rumors, he would not sit idly by. Letitia was aware of the fact that her father had no use for her. A moment later, she froze in place in surprise as she saw the young Duke. She looked at him in surprise and called out. Letitia looked closely at the young man and said with a smile that they had not seen each other for a long time, and also asked how he had wished all this time. He said with a smile that he was doing well, and also asked how she was doing. She smiled and said that she was fine, and also said that she had not seen his younger ones today. Enoch, with a smile, said that he was alone today. The young lady in turn sighed heavily. He looked at her in surprise and asked if something had happened. Enoch looked at the young lady and said that she looked very gloomy today. Letitia looked at the young man and asked if he knew anything about her family's power. Enoch looked at her and said that he only knew that everyone in their family had unique abilities. She asked if he knew that she had no abilities. He asked in bewilderment if these weren't empty rumors. Letitia sighed heavily and said that her family was actually very worried about this, and at first she thought that she didn't have the ability, but now it seemed to her that she had completely bad powers. He looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she meant. The young lady Soya said sadly that she seemed to have the ability to make other people unhappy. She said she doubted it and didn't think it was really true. The young man looked at her intently but said nothing. But a moment later he said that he didn't know the details, but God was touched by the prayer of the Leroy family. He said that everyone knew that this was why he gave their family special abilities. He smiled tenderly and said that God could not have given such a family anything bad, and he did not think that it had the ability to make others unhappy. The young lady was grateful to the young man for such pleasant words addressed to her. She tenderly hugged him and thanked him. The young lady looked at her sister intently and asked if she had heard about the rumors. Diana looked at her in bewilderment and asked what exactly they were talking about. Irene said that it was time to talk about her older sister. Diana smiled and told her sister not to worry because she was there who brought happiness to their family. Irene sighed heavily and said that she was still worried because the last time she went for a walk, she bumped into her sister. Diana sighed heavily and said that it was all a bit awkward. Irene looked at her sister with concern and asked if their father knew about this. Diana smiled and said that perhaps he was busy because he was starting a new business. The young lady was worried because she didn't know what to do in this situation. Diana looked at her sister with a smile and said that she didn't need to worry. A moment later, Diana told her sister that she would definitely talk to her father when he returned, but for now she needed to listen to her. Irene was worried and asked her sister what would happen to their older sister when their father returned and found out about everything. Diana said with a grin that she didn't know yet what would happen to her, and most likely their father would lock her in the room or kick her out. At the same time, young Letitia was quietly crying next to the young Duke. He looked at her intently as he was worried, but a moment later, he said that she would find herself very worried, so he would give her his luckiest item, the one that brings good luck. She looked at him in bewilderment as she did not understand what he was talking about. He smiled and handed her the small handkerchief that she had given him earlier and said with a smile that it was his luck because it was a very valuable thing for him, so she should take care of it. She said with a smile that since this was what he cherished so much, she had no choice but to return it to him. He looked at her intently and said that there was no need to return the scarf and that everything was fine, but she screamed that it was not so. Letitia looked at the young man with a joyful smile and said that she would definitely return it to him. Enoch smiled and said that they would do as she wanted. She smiled and said that she would like to repay him. He looked at her in bewilderment, asked what she meant. She said that she always only received something from him. Enoch looked at her with a smile, but a moment later he asked if she would like to come to the nightly examination. The young lady was surprised, as she did not expect to hear such a thing. He smiled and said that he thought it would give him an extra incentive, but if it was too much for her, then she might not go. Letitia immediately shouted that this was not so, and she would definitely come as she wanted to cheer him up. The young Duke looked tenderly at the young lady and said with a smile that he would wait for her. Letitia froze for a moment as she saw his beautiful and kind smile. She was excited as she felt feelings that she had not understood until today. She did not understand what was happening to her. That same evening, she slowly walked back home. But as soon as she entered the estate, she looked at everyone in surprise as she did not understand what they were doing in the hall. At the same time, Irene was screaming that everyone should see that her sister was walking around freely. She was furious and could not calm down considering how her sister was wandering around the house calmly all the time. Letitia looked at everyone present in bewilderment and asked what was going on. The young man in turn shouted and called his sister. Xaviera was stunned and shouted at his sister to stay back and stay put. Letitia was shocked by her brother's behavior. Seos sighed heavily and asked the young people to leave. They were shocked because they thought he would send their sister away. A moment later, he could not bear it any longer and shouted that they had to leave. The young people were shocked by such pressure. Seos looked closely at the young lady and said that it seemed that rumors about her had spread throughout the mansion. He sighed heavily and said that at times like these she had to stay strong. Seos looked closely at the young lady and with a gentle smile said that he would go to the magic tower and try to find out something, but until then she needed to pull herself together and hold on. She sighed heavily and thanked him. A few days later, the young lady was leafing through all the books in search of information. Letitia understood that if she found proof that she had a pretty good ability, all the chaos would finally end. She wanted to prove to everyone that her abilities did not bring misfortune to anyone. After some time had passed, the day of the night's examinations arrived. The young lady knew that everyone was wearing bracelets with gold thread. She was wondering where Levian was now. She looked around intently because she did not know where he was. But a moment later, the young lady froze in place as she saw her sister standing next to the young man. Diana put the bracelet on the young man with a joyful smile and said that she made the bracelet especially for him to bring him good luck. The young man looked at her with a gentle smile and thanked her. Letitia, in turn, froze in shock on the spot. She knew that everything had turned out for the best. She decided to leave so as not to disturb them. A moment later, she was taken aback and stopped as she saw a young man. She smiled and called the young duke. He looked at her with bewilderment as he did not expect to see her. He looked at her closely and said with a smile that he thought she would not come after all. Letitia looked at him closely and said that she had previously told him that she would come to cheer him up. She looked at him closely and noticed that he was missing his gold bracelet. Letitia hesitated, but a moment later she asked if he would accept it if he didn't mind. Enoch looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if it was really a gold bracelet. She smiled and said that she would like to give it to him, and if it would not be too much of a burden to him, then he could accept the bracelet. The young man froze for a moment in surprise and embarrassment, but after a couple of minutes he accepted the gift with a joyful smile and thanked the young lady. Letitia smiled and said that this bracelet looked good. Letitia looked closely at the young man and said with a joyful smile that she really hoped that this would help him improve his result at least a little. Some time ago, Levian was staring into the distance, hoping that the young lady would come. After a few minutes, he turned around because he heard someone calling him. He looked at the young lady with hope because he hoped that it was his Letitia who had come to him. Diana smiled and said that it was she who came. He sighed heavily and looked at her intently as he did not expect to see her. A moment later, he asked Diana where his sister was. Diana sadly said that her sister could not come and she sent her instead. He sighed heavily and said that he understood. A moment later, Levian turned around and thanked her for her support, saying that it was time for him to go. The young lady was shocked. She grabbed the young man's hand and asked him to wait. Diana looked closely at the young man and with a radiant smile said that she had something for him. He looked closely at her and noticed that she presented him with a gold bracelet. Levian smiled and said that she shouldn't have done that. He looked at her with a smile and said that she was taking care of him instead of his sister. She said with a smile that at least she should have taken care of it. Diana smiled and said that she would definitely support him. A moment later, she looked at the young man in surprise as she saw a change in his expression. Levian in turn looked intently into the distance and saw Letitia with the young duke. He was furious as they were having a nice conversation. Diana in turn froze in place from shock and surprise. She was shocked because her sister was again next to the Duke of the cursed family. But a moment later she looked at her sister with a fierce grin, since this sight was only to her advantage. Leal looked at her brother with a joyful smile and said that he didn't need to be nervous because everything would be fine. Enoch said with a smile that if anyone saw her so nervous they would think that she was going to take the entrance exam, not him. She sighed heavily and said that one of them must be nervous, and in any case, he must do his best. A moment later, the young lady hesitated as she felt sad. Enoch looked at his sister in bewilderment as he did not understand what had happened. Ian sighed heavily and started talking about the golden bracelet. Enoch looked at them with a smile and said that he was already lucky, so they should just wish him luck. Sometime later, the young man arrived for the entrance exam. He saw a crowd of people. He thought for a moment as he remembered the young lady as last time he invited her to the entrance exam. He sighed heavily as he knew that this was most likely an excessive request on his part. But a moment later, he was taken aback and looked around as he heard someone calling him. He froze in place for a moment as he saw that the young lady was carrying a golden thread in her hands. Enoch looked closely at the small bracelet. He mentally thanked the young lady for coming, and so he was sure that today he would definitely be lucky. At the same time, the young lady stared into the distance as she knew that she had to cheer him up. Well, a moment later, she was taken aback and turned around as she heard someone calling her. She looked at the young man in surprise as she did not expect him to approach her. Levion looked intently at the young lady and asked if she could spare some time and have tea with him. She looked at him in surprise as she had not expected such a thing, but still agreed. Letitia in turn wondered if something had happened. Sometime later, they sat at the table and quietly sipped tea. She was puzzled. She wondered if she had ever felt so awkward around him. Levion looked closely at the young lady and asked if she had anything to say to him. She looked at him in confusion as she did not understand what he was talking about. He looked at her angrily and asked if she was asking because she really had nothing to tell him. Levion. Looking at the young lady, he said that she asked Diana to tell him that she could not come, but it seemed that she had time to fool around with other men. He said that they had not yet broken off the engagement, but she was already flirting with other men. The young lady was shocked by his words. She could not bear it and screamed, but he said that she should behave appropriately. He sighed heavily and said that she should not do anything that could offend him. Letitia froze for a moment in rage but said nothing. Levion looked at her closely and said that he was sure he had told her to try her best to awaken her abilities when she had free time. He was burning with anger and fury as he remembered how she looked at the young duke with a tender smile. Levion looked at the young lady intently, but said nothing more. He was burning with anger and fury as he wanted to immediately show the young duke where his place really was. The young lady, without looking at the young man, asked him to tell her what she needed to do. He sighed heavily and asked his companion, looking at her, whether he really had to explain word by word while she just sat and looked at him. She looked at him with fury and asked if he knew that they were different. Levion said that didn't mean she could just sit quietly. She was furious and asked what he wanted her to do when he himself did not even try to help her. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she really asked him about this. Levion looked at the young lady and confidently said that she should take care of it herself. Letitia screamed furiously that he had no idea how hard she had tried. He sighed heavily and called her, but the young lady said that she did not want to talk anymore. She looked at him intently and said that unfortunately it was very difficult for her to be with him. She asked him to come home right now. Sometime later, the young lady was left alone in the room. She was puzzled by the situation. She was in shock. She didn't understand when she had become like this, Letitia. She understood that she needed to go out and take a walk now in order to calm down. Sometime later, she went outside to get some fresh air but saw her sister. Diana looked closely at her sister since she was still there. She asked if there were really so many ways to embarrass the people around her. She looked closely at her sister and asked who she looked like. She wanted to know if sister was really going to walk around looking like that. Letitia looked at our sister with bewilderment and asked what was wrong with her. Diana reached out to her sister and asked where she had even found such a cheap thing. Letitia pushed her sister away and told her not to touch her. Diana looked at her sister with fury and surprise as she did not expect this. Letitia shouted at her sister not to touch her, but Diana did not listen to her sister. She pulled the ribbon out of her hair and shouted that she should not have put a cheap ribbon on her hair. Letitia was shocked because she didn't expect anything like this from her sister. Some time ago, a young maid with a joyful smile presented a beautiful ribbon to her mistress and said that it was a trifle, but she really wanted to give it to her because thanks to it her brother became much better, and therefore Mary really wanted to repay her in the same way one day. Letitia hastily reached for the ribbon that had recently been given to her. But a moment later, Diana stepped on the ribbon and with a smirk asked for forgiveness as she did it by accident. Letitia was shocked as she understood that her sister did it on purpose. Diana looked at her sister intently and asked why she was looking at her like that because it was just an accident. In turn, the young lady could not stand such boorish behavior and with the speed of lightning grabbed her sister by the hair. Diana was shocked by her sister's behavior. She screamed for her to let her go immediately. Letitia screamed at her sister that she would not let her go until she apologized to her. They quarreled for a while, but after a few minutes the Marquise came up to them and looked at his daughters in surprise. He was shocked by their behavior and did not understand what they had done. Diana turned around and looked at her father and said that her sister had suddenly grabbed her hair. Letitia was in shock. She screamed at her father that it was not so. She said that her sister had grabbed her hair ribbon and pulled it out. The Marquise in turn looked at Letitia with anger and told her to shut her mouth immediately. He did not understand how the elder sister could quarrel with the younger one. He shouted furiously at his daughter that she could not do anything properly. A moment later he hugged Diana and asked if she was okay. Letitia in turn looked intently at her family as she was very upset. A moment later, the young man came out into the street and asked the young lady what had happened. Letitia sighed heavily and said that nothing special had happened. He looked at her intently and called out. She sighed heavily and said that it didn't matter. He asked her to tell him anyway why she fought with Diana. Letitia said that her sister was the first to attack her. Letitia told the young man that Diana had said she was ashamed of the way she looked, and then she had torn the ribbon out of her hair. He sighed heavily and asked him if they had just made such a fuss over a ribbon. She looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Levian. Looking at the young lady, he said that he would buy as many ribbons as she wanted so that she should make peace with Diana. Letitia looked at him furiously and asked what he had just said. He looked at her with bewilderment as he did not understand what she was talking about. Letitia said again that she would like him to repeat what he had said. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she really wanted to start a fight with him now because of some ribbon. She screamed that it could be the most ordinary hair ribbon that he could buy at any moment, but not for her. She looked intently at the young man and said that she had received this ribbon as a gift, and it was precious to her. He sighed heavily and said that was why he told her that he would buy her whatever she wanted. Letitia looked at him furiously and asked if he really thought she would like what he bought. Levian froze in place for a moment in surprise. She turned around and told him as she left that she didn't want anything from him. The young man was puzzled by this situation because he did not want to do this. A moment later, the Marquis saw the young man and called him. The Marquis looked intently at the young man and asked if he was already leaving. Levian sighed heavily and said that it was already so late, and he thought it would be better if he went home today. The Marquis smiled and said goodbye to his young man. The young man was puzzled as there were rumors about the breakup of the pomologist, but the Marquis still wanted to meet again. Levian understood that Letitia had to awaken her abilities as soon as possible. He remembered her smiling and asking why he didn't try using a sword or a bow. After she asked him something like this, he felt the power. He was surprised because he didn't expect something like this. Levian thought about this situation for a moment as everything seemed very strange. At the same time, Diana was screaming with rage as her hair was ruined. She was furious. She did not understand how her sister dared to do something like that. Diana gave in from anger and malice since her sister had disgraced her in front of Levian. She understood that she would not let her sister get away with something like this. Mary looked at her mistress in surprise and asked what had happened to her since she saw the state her mistress was in. Letitia said, puzzled that her sister had started it first. Mary looked at the young lady in bewilderment, but she said that nothing had happened and everything was fine. Mary looked at the young lady closely and said that she would always be on her side, and so she should tell her when she had difficult times. She said with a smile that she would support her at any time. The young lady thanked her maid for her kind words. Some time later, the maids were discussing the young mistress as she had been told to sit in her room, but she continued to wander around. They would have liked to tell her to sit in the room, but they were afraid of her to death. As she passed Diana with a joyful smile, told the maids that they should be patient for a little while because soon they would not have to worry about this. The maids were surprised, but the young lady said that they should just trust her. They looked at Diana closely and said with a smile that she was the best mistress they knew, that she was magnificent, generous, and kind as always. Some time later, the young lady came to her father. The Marquis sighed heavily and asked his daughter how she was feeling. Diana said that she was much better than yesterday. He smiled and said he was glad to hear that, and also asked if she was taking her medication. She said that of course she was taking her medication and wanted to tell him something. He looked at her closely and asked if everything was okay, and also said that she should not be shy and should tell him everything. A moment later he asked in surprise what happened to her hand. He was furious and did not understand who dared to do such a thing to her. She looked at him with a smirk and began her story. At the same time, the young lady was sitting in the garden and closely watching the blossoming flowers. Thanks to the flowers, she felt a little better. She walked slowly back to the palace, but a moment later she froze in place as she saw her father. The Marquis in turn looked at his daughter with bewilderment. He asked her if she really had the ability to bring misfortune. He was furious because at the same time she continued to roam freely around the house. Letitia was in shock and didn't understand what her father was talking about. The Marquis was furious because she was still communicating with the Duke burning. With anger he asked if he had not warned her to stay away from him. He looked at his daughter with fury and said that she should see for herself since her sister suffered because she got involved with the cursed family. Letitia looked at them in surprise, since she did not understand what they were talking about. She looked closely at her sister and asked what happened to her wrist. The Marquis angrily approached his daughter and said that she was only bringing bad luck and would eventually destroy their family. Soon Letizia was shocked and did not understand what her father was talking about. She was puzzled because her father was putting pressure on her. She could not answer him anything. A moment later, the Marquis looked at his daughter with fury and a hint of fear and said that she was henceforth excluded from their family. Letizia was shocked by this statement from her father. He shouted furiously that today she was no longer his daughter. He did not want her to let her misfortune touch their family. She was shocked and could not believe her father's words. She wished she could stop him, but it was all in vain, so the young lady watched in silence as her family walked away from her, leaving her to her fate. The young lady looked closely at her sister and asked if everything was okay with her wrist. She was puzzled. She did not understand how her sister could so freely remove the bandage. Diana sighed heavily and said that everything was okay with her. A moment later, she said with a fierce grin that she wasn't hurt at all. Some time ago, a young lady came to her father and told him that her sister was bringing misfortune to everyone, and she also said that she had not intended to persuade him at all, but yesterday her sister said that she wanted to be hurt, and after which she received a small injury. Diana looked at her sister with a grin and said that it was very nice when someone with such bad luck finally left this house. A moment later, she burst into wild laughter. At the same time, the Marquis was puzzled by the fact that his daughter brought bad luck on the same day she ceased to be part of their family. The young lady ran away from home in a hurry. She was puzzled because she knew that everything was already over. She was worried and didn't know what to do because she had nowhere to go. She looked closely at the small scarf because that was all she had taken with her when she left home. She remembered the young Duke who had given her the handkerchief, and he had said with a smile that it was a very valuable thing for him and that she should take care of it. A moment later, her young lady could not bear it and began to cry, but at the same time she prayed to the goddess of happiness and asked for help because she had nowhere to go. She was puzzled and did not know what to do now. She asked for someone to help her. The young lady looked at the sky in bewilderment as she saw that it had started to rain. She understood that she needed to get up immediately because sitting on the ground she could simply get wet, although she understood that this was no longer important now because she did not even have the strength to get up. Letitia sighed heavily and wondered if it was possible that the ability to bring misfortune was really hers. She was puzzled because she didn't even know where to go. But a moment later, the young lady turned around as she heard a familiar voice. She looked at the young Duke with bewilderment, as she did not expect to see him at all. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she had fallen. He said that she might get wet, so holding out his hand, he asked her to get up as quickly as possible. Enoch looked closely at the young lady and asked what had happened. She sighed heavily and said that nothing had happened. He was taken aback and said that it was raining now and already very dark, so he had to accompany her to the mansion. Letitia looked away from him and said that she would not go because she simply could not do it. She sighed heavily and said that unfortunately she was kicked out. He looked at her in bewilderment because he did not understand what she was talking about. She sadly said that she no longer had a place to return to. She was puzzled because she knew he thought she was pathetic. Enoch in turn looked intently at the young lady and said nothing. But a moment later he asked if it would be okay for her to go to his mansion, if that was okay with her. Letitia in turn was surprised, but he said that he would like her to rest a little at least today. She was surprised and asked if this was true. Letitia asked if he did not mind her presence in his house. He smiled and said that of course he didn't mind, and he was sure that his family would also be happy with her presence in the house. She looked at him with a smile and said that then he should take care of her. A moment later, they arrived at the young Duke's mansion. He led her into a small room with a smile and said that she could use it. He also said that she should rest a little today as she was tired. She apologized for intruding so late and also thanked him. A moment later, he turned around and called out to the lady who looked at him in bewilderment. Enoch smiled and said that if she had nowhere else to go, she could stay here for a while. She was surprised as she did not expect to hear such a thing. He smiled and said that she was free to stay in the mansion for as long as she wanted. Letitia was shocked by his statement and said that in that case she would cause him inconvenience. He smiled and asked what inconvenience he was talking about. He asked her not to say such nonsense. Enoch left with a smile and wished the young lady good night. She was taken aback and embarrassedly wished him good night, but now she was once again convinced that the young man was very good. But in turn, she knew that she could not remain in his debt any longer. Letitia was very excited, and at the same time puzzled because she did not know what to do now. Levian looked at the Marquis in surprise and asked what he meant when he said that he wanted to kick her out. He asked the Marquis if he had really excluded the young lady from the family register. The Marquis sighed heavily and said that he simply had no choice. Levian was shocked by the man's statement. He asked in confusion where his daughter was now. The Marquis sighed heavily and said that he didn't know that either Levian was puzzled and shocked. He didn't understand how the Marquis couldn't know something like that. He shouted at the Marquis angrily. But a moment later, he left the Marquis and his father. The man sighed heavily and told the Marquis that he very much hoped that he would understand his son since they were close after all, and now he was worried about the young lady. The Marquis sighed heavily and asked his friend if his children also disobeyed him. The Marquis was puzzled but understood everything. At the same time, the young man sighed heavily. He was furious. He did not understand how everything could happen like this. He remembered the young lady as he was going to buy her a ribbon, but she was expelled from the family. He knew that he simply could not sit idly by. Sometime later, the Marquis returned home. He knew that lately everything had been going as well as possible. But a moment later, he was taken aback because the carriage suddenly, for no apparent reason, began to shake. He looked out of the window and, looking at the coachman, asked what had happened. The man sighed heavily and said that the wheel had suddenly broken, and he thought he would have to wait a little. The Marquis was shocked and did not understand how something like this could happen when the carriage was completely repaired. After some time, the young men looked closely at the young lady, as they noticed that she looked better today than yesterday. Yang sighed heavily and asked his brother what happened to the young lady. Enoch looked at the young lady with a puzzled expression and said that she had informed him that she had been removed from the family register. The young man was shocked, as he had not expected to hear anything like that. Enoch was confused because he didn't understand why she was kicked out. He wondered if it was because she didn't have powers. He was furious and wondered if it really mattered that much. Enoch sighed heavily and asked his brother to pretend that he knew nothing about such an incident. The young man said that he would do just that. Enoch thanked his brother for his understanding. At the same time, the young lady was slowly picking strawberries. She was worried and knew that she could not forever be in debt to the Duke and his family. She knew that she had to be useful to them in some way. Sometime later, she started cleaning the estate. After some time, the young Duke saw her and froze in surprise. He came closer to her and called out in bewilderment. He didn't understand what she was doing at all. Enoch. Looking at the young lady, he said that she did not have to do such things at all. He asked if it was really so hard for her to be here. She sighed heavily and said that this was not true at all. Enoch said that he wanted her to be able to relax while she was here. He said that she didn't have to do any hard work at all. She sighed heavily and said that she just wanted to pay him back. Letitia looked at the young man closely and said that he had taken her in when her family abandoned her, even allowed her to stay for a while, and she just wanted to find a way to be helpful. He looked at her in surprise, as he had not expected to hear such a thing. She said sheepishly that he had always treated her well. He was in shock and wondered what was going on. He didn't understand how much she had been suffering so far. He wondered if it was the same in her house. Enoch looked at the young lady intently and said that she should never again use the word thrown because she was not a thing to be thrown away so easily. Enoch, looking at the young lady with confidence, said that he would never throw her out. He smiled a gentle smile and said that she should just relax and rest. Letitia was shocked as she did not expect this. Enoch told the young lady that he did not want any debt relationship between them. He asked if she understood what he was talking about. She looked at him in bewilderment. He smiled and asked what they should do now. She sighed heavily and said that she didn't know. Enoch, looking at the young lady, he said that she should no longer pick up a broom and should not clean and should not water the flowers. He said that she should just calm down and relax. She sighed heavily and said that she understood this, but a moment later she asked if she could at least water the flowers occasionally, as she liked them very much. He smiled and said that she could do it. She smiled and said that she thought it was normal to clean the room she lived in. The Duke looked at her intently but said nothing, but a moment later he finally allowed her to do so. He looked at her intently and said that she was not to do anything else, and there was only one thing he wanted from the young lady. Enoch looked at her with a gentle smile and said that he wanted her to be comfortable here. Letitia, in turn, was taken aback for a moment, as she did not expect to hear anything like that. But a moment later, she thanked him with a smile for always taking care of her. She looked at him with a tender and joyful smile and told him that she was very glad that she had him. The young man in turn froze for a moment in embarrassment. A moment later he smiled and said that his sister wanted to bake a pie. He asked the young lady if she would like to join. She smiled and walked along with him. A moment later they entered the hall and saw young people. Letitia smiled and asked what they were doing. At the same time, the young people were closely studying a small document. Letitia looked at them in surprise and asked what had happened. The young people rushed towards them in a hurry. The young lady handed Letitia a document in which she read that the exam for membership in the Imperial Order had been passed. A moment later, the young lady rushed to hug her brother. She was glad that he passed the exam. Enoch, in turn, was shocked and did not understand what was wrong with his sister. He shouted for her to leave him alone immediately. Letitia approached the young man with a joyful smile and congratulated him. She said that he was now a knight. Enoch looked away from the young lady as he was very embarrassed. Leal, in turn, looked out the window in bewilderment as she heard some noise. A moment later, she said that someone had come to visit them. She looked at the young man in surprise, as she did not know who he was. She turned around and told her brother that they had a guest. The Duke was very surprised as he did not know who had come to see them. A moment later, the young lady informed her brother that Lord Levian had arrived. Some time later, the Duke took his companion to meet the young lord. The Duke sighed heavily and said that he would probably leave. They were left alone, and the young lady stared at the young lord, while a dead silence reigned between them. Levian looked closely at the young lady and asked why she didn't tell him about this situation. He asked her, puzzled, if she knew how long he had been looking for her. She sighed heavily and asked if that was all he wanted to tell her. He sighed heavily and suggested that she come back and talk later. She looked at him in bewilderment and asked where she needed to return. He looked at her in surprise because he did not understand the essence of the question. She sighed heavily and asked her companion where she should return. Levian asked in surprise if she was really going to stay here. He said that she could go to him since she could stay and live there. Letitia, in turn, sighed heavily, but did not answer. Moments later, she looked at the young man intently and firmly said that she did not want to go anywhere and she would stay here. He looked at her in bewilderment, as he did not expect to hear something like that. She looked at him intently and said that it was not up to him to decide where she should live, and with whom he was shocked by her statement, and said that he was still her fiancé. In turn, the young lady began to listen to him and said that she would stay here. He sighed heavily and said that he thought that was the end of their conversation. At the same time, the young people were closely watching their conversation. They did not understand why he came to them at all. Enoch sighed heavily and said that it seemed that the young man came to pick up the young lady. Enoch knew that they were publicly engaged. Ian looked at his brother in surprise and asked what they should do, then if she wanted to leave with him. Enoch sighed and said with sadness in his voice that he did not know what to do. A moment later, the young people accidentally collided on the street. They looked at each other intently, but after a while the young lord simply walked past the duke. The young lady was furious and asked her brother if the young man should not at least apologize or thank her after the way he suddenly showed up at their place. Letitia hurriedly went out to the young people and asked for forgiveness for the young man's rudeness. Liel looked intently at the young lady and said that it was not her fault at all. Liel looked closely at the young lady and asked what they were talking about. But a moment later, Ian took his sister and said that it was time for them to pick strawberries. The young lady screamed that she had picked all the strawberries. She was in shock and just wanted to talk to the young lady, but he dragged her. Enoch looked closely at Letitia and asked if she would like to come back into the house. Letitia sighed heavily and, looking away from the Duke, said that she would like to tell him something. He looked at her in surprise as he didn't know what she wanted to talk about. A moment later, the young lady said with sadness in her voice that she would like to stay at the estate for a while. She looked at him intently and said that, realizing that she was causing him trouble, he looked at her in surprise as he did not expect such a thing. But a moment later he sighed heavily and said that he thought about us getting ready to leave. Letitia looked at him in surprise, but a moment later said with a smile that, of course, that was not true, and she really wanted to stay. Enoch looked at her with a joyful smile and said that she could stay as long as she wanted. He also said that she should make herself at home. Letitia, with a joyful smile, told the young man that she might be staying with him longer than she had expected. He smiled and said that this was very good and that she could just see that they had many rooms. She was shocked and didn't understand how a person could be so friendly. She looked at him intently and said that she might be here for a very long time. He said with a smile that that would be nice. A moment later, the young lady shouted that she could stay here for the rest of her life. But after her words, she froze in place as she was embarrassed by them. He smiled and asked if she had just threatened him. Letitia was taken aback and said that she had not. He smiled and said that he had not expected that a lady could say something like that. Letitia screamed that she didn't mean it that way at all. Enoch smiled and said that he liked the threat anyway, so he would think about it. She was surprised because she didn't expect to hear something like that from him. Enoch smiled and asked if she had anything else to tell him. She said sheepishly that she didn't want to tell him anything else. With confusion on her face, she shouted that it was time for her to go and ran away from him. But a moment later, she froze in place in surprise as she did not understand why the door did not open. The young Duke approached the young lady and with a smile said that the problem was in the door handle. She froze in place as he came too close to her. He smiled a gentle smile and said that she needed to turn the handle the other way. She was in shock as her heart started pounding again. Sometime later, Letitia came into the room to the young people. Leal said that her heart was pounding wildly as she thought that the young lady would leave them. Leal smiled and asked if they should go there again after a long break. Letitia looked at her with bewilderment and still did not understand where she wanted to go. A moment later, they were back out into the city. Leal smiled and handed the young lady a gold coin and said that it had been a long time so they could try playing the game of revenge again. Letitia was taken aback and said that unfortunately she was very bad at this kind of thing. Leal smiled and said that there was nothing she couldn't do, so she had to try. A moment later, the young lady sighed heavily and said that she would try once. After the game, she sighed heavily and said that she had told them earlier that she was not very good at it. Leal smiled and said that the young lady was close to the center. Letitia sighed heavily and said that she would like to win a sack of flour. Leal looked at the young lady in surprise and asked why she needed flour. Letitia smiled and said that she simply wanted it. She looked away from the young lady and said that they had been very happy about it last time. Brother and sister looked at each other in bewilderment. A moment later, they laughed wildly. Letitia looked at them in surprise as she did not understand why they were suddenly laughing. Ian looked at the young lady with a smile and said that it was good to have a bag of flour, but he asked if it was so important. She looked at him with bewilderment. But a moment later he smiled and said that they could just have fun together. She was surprised as she did not expect to hear such a thing, but she knew that he was right, as it was not about flour at all, and they could just have fun. She smiled and looking at the young man said that he was completely right. Liel Iscosa looked sideways at her friend and asked where else they could go. A moment later, the young lady froze in place as she saw a familiar silhouette. She stared into the distance and wondered if it was her brother. At the same time, the young duke was reading a letter about a mine with pink diamonds. He thought for a moment and remembered how he had previously gone into the same mine with his father. The father told his son that once they got the pink diamonds, they would be rich. Enoch knew full well that he needed to sort this out as quickly as possible. A moment later, he looked out the window in surprise as he heard the sound of a carriage. Enoch looked at the young man with bewilderment as he did not expect to see him at all. Enoch, looking at the young man, said that at the moment the young lady was not in the mansion. Levian looked closely at the young man and said that he had come to him today because he wanted to talk. Enoch told the young lord that he understood him and asked him to follow him. Levian looked around the estate and noticed that it looked shabby. He didn't understand why the young lady wanted to stay in such a place. He hoped that she ate well here. Levian looked at the young man closely and said that he had come to him to ask him for a favor. He asked the young duke to convince Letitia. Enoch looked at the young lord with bewilderment and asked what he should convince her of. Levian menacingly said that this place was not intended for a young lady. He was furious and could no longer allow her to stay in such a place. The young duke sighed heavily and told the lord that he seemed to have misunderstood something. Levian looked at him in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. Enoch, looking at the young man, said that he should speak about this with her and not with him. Levian cried out and called the duke. Enoch sighed heavily and said that he was not going to do anything no matter what he said. Levian looked at the young duke in bewilderment and asked why this was so. He was sure that the young duke was forcibly keeping the lady in such an estate. Enoch looked at the young man with fury and asked if he really thought that he was holding her by force. Enoch said that the lady had made the decision to stay and no one had forced her to do anything. The young lord was furious. He shouted that she was a good and kind-hearted girl who could not abandon someone in trouble. Enoch sighed heavily and said that if you look at it that way, in this case, it was not he but the young lord who was trying to harm the young lady. Levian was in shock and did not understand what the young duke was talking about. Enoch looked at the young man intently and asked him to leave as he had nothing more to say to him. Levian looked at the young man intently but did not answer. A moment later he sighed heavily and apologized for the disrespect. After a few seconds he finally decided to leave. At the same time, a young man was leisurely strolling through the city, but he suddenly turned around because he heard someone calling him. He looked at the young lady in surprise as he did not expect to see her. When times were hard during his childhood, the older sister he knew took care of her younger siblings. She also took care of her sick mother at the same time. She never showed any signs of grief and was always kind and respectful. He knew that some time had already passed. He knew that they had all awakened their abilities, but now all that the elder sister could bring was misfortune and damage. Besides, he saw that she had become friends with a similar family. Emile sighed heavily as he knew that the rumors were true. Emile looked at his sister intently and said that he thought it was all a lie when he heard that she was staying at the Duke's mansion, but now he realized that it was all true. Letitia looked at her brother closely and said that everything was correct and she was living with them. Emile was upset because she knew how much her father hated the Duke, but she still did it. The young lady looked at her brother intently and said that now she, like him, did not need to worry about it. He looked at her in surprise, but she gave him a menacing look. A few seconds later, she said that they no longer had to worry about each other. He sighed heavily and said that everything was correct and that he had acted thoughtlessly. After a few seconds, he turned around and walked past her. Letitia froze for a moment, realizing that she was better off alone. But after a few seconds, the young lady hugged her tightly. Letitia froze in place in surprise, as she did not expect such a thing. Leal looked at her friend closely and said that they were here for her, so she shouldn't get upset over trifles. Letitia smiled and said that everything was fine and that it didn't upset her at all. She hugged her friend tenderly and said with a smile that she was fine. At the same time in the mansion, a young lady accidentally tripped and fell. Xavier quickly ran to his sister and asked if she was okay. Diana looked at her wrist with excitement and said that it was in a lot of pain and that she really thought she had sprained her wrist. Xavier looked at his sister closely and said that she needed to be careful. He asked what would happen if the same place was damaged. She looked at him with bewilderment and did not know what he was talking about. Xavier looked at his sister and said that she had previously said that she had hurt her hand because of her older sister Diana, sighed heavily and said that she was fine now. As she left, she thanked her brother for his concern. She also said that she was fine. In turn, the young lady was burning with rage. She did not understand what had happened at all and why she was so unlucky. She knew that her mother had broken her favorite cup earlier. She was surprised because she suddenly tripped on level ground and hurt her hand. She wondered if luck had really disappeared. It worried her very much. At the same time, the young ladies were painstakingly sitting over their drawings. Letitia came closer to the young lady and asked with a smile what she was drawing. Leal in turn shuddered and screamed as she did not expect to see anyone at all. Letitia looked closely at the young lady and asked for forgiveness because she did not want to scare her. Leal smiled and said that everything was fine. Letitia in turn asked her friend if she had disturbed her by any chance. Leal smiled and said that it was not so, and also asked her if she had come alone. Letitia smiled and said that it was so, and also asked the young lady what she was drawing. Leal slowly showed all her drawings. Leal said that it was her secret and she hadn't shown it to anyone yet. Letitia smiled and said that she would keep quiet about it. Letizia in turn said with a joyful smile that these drawings were very beautiful. She said that she would like to see the jewelry that would be created for the young lady. Letitia in turn noticed that this bracelet was very similar to a gold one. Leal said that she was unable to buy a gold thread bracelet for her brother's entrance exam, so she drew one instead. She said that she tried everything to buy the bracelet, but she could not get it. She also said that she forgot to thank the young lady for it. Letitia looked at the young lady with sadness. But a moment later, Letitia asked her friend why she didn't make a decoration like a bracelet and a gold thread. She looked at her in bewilderment and asked if she really needed to try making a decoration. Letitia said with a joyful smile that everything was correct, and if she put on this bracelet, her wish would come true. Leal looked at her friend with bewilderment and said that the bracelet she drew does not grant wishes. Letitia smiled and told her friend that she would have to give it meaning. Letitia looked closely at her friend and said with a smile that she knew how to do it better than anyone else. Desire is something that every person can have regardless of status. The young lady froze for a moment in embarrassment, but a moment later, she told Letitia that she was absolutely right. Leal smiled and said that anyone could choose to have a wish or not. Leal said with a smile that it would be nice if her paintings with accessories could give someone courage. Letitia looked at the young lady with a joyful smile because she knew that she would succeed. But a moment later, she asked her friend why it was a secret for her brothers. Leal sighed heavily and said that she just thought her brother wouldn't like it very much. She knew they were in huge debt from their father's business, and if she told him she wanted to go into the jewelry business, he would definitely not like it. Letitia thought for a moment and felt sad, but in turn she thought that the young duke would support his sister. A moment later, a young duke approached them and asked with a smile what they were doing. The young ladies were taken aback as they did not expect to see him. Leal was puzzled and rushed to her drawings. Enoch looked at his sister in surprise and asked why she was so surprised by his arrival, as if she had seen a ghost. The young lady was taken aback and said that this was not so. Letitia quietly told her friend that everything would be okay. She didn't need to worry. A moment later, the young lady sighed heavily. And a few seconds later, she told her brother that she was the one who had drawn these pictures. She said that she would like to open a jewelry business and sell her paintings. Enoch looked at his sister intently but said nothing. Leal sighed heavily and said that she knew he wouldn't like the idea, but she promised him that she would take this matter very seriously because she wanted to do everything in her power and didn't want to cause any problems in the family. She said with confidence that she would not like her father drag the family into debt. Enoch looked intently at his sister and said with complete confidence that he never thought that she was irresponsible. He smiled and said that she could do whatever she wanted and should not worry about anything. The young lady froze in place for a moment in surprise as she did not expect to hear anything like that. Letitia looked closely at the young people. Leal looked at her brother and asked if she could ask him for a favor. He looked at her with bewilderment in a way he had not expected. Some time later, they went out into the city. Letitia looked closely at the young Julia Edie and said with a smile that she was very glad that she was able to calmly talk to her brother Lyle. With a smile said that everything was correct and all thanks to the young lady. Letitia smiled and told her friend that she didn't expect such a great idea to come to her mind. Lyle said with a smile that she thought her brother wouldn't even listen to her, but it even sounded funny since they could use a pink diamond with impurities on jewelry. Letitia said with a joyful smile that this was a very good idea, and now they just needed to find a master who would make all the decorations. Sometime later, the young ladies went in search of a master, but each time they were refused. They went from one master to another, but all in vain. They walked in the hope that someone would help them. But unfortunately, they were met with only refusal everywhere. Letitia smiled and told her friend that they could have searched a little longer because she was sure that they could find the best jeweler. The young lady sighed heavily and said that it would be good if everything worked out for them. Lost in her thoughts, the young lady accidentally collided with a man. She fell to the ground with a crash, as the collision was very strong. In a hurry, she rushed to her drawings. The man looked at the young lady intently and apologized because he was in such a hurry due to an urgent matter that he did not look around. The young lady smiled and said that nothing terrible had happened, but asked him to be a little more careful next time. He apologized again and also said that he was in a hurry. Letitia looked at her friend with concern and asked if she was sure she wasn't hurt anywhere. Leal smiled and said that she was fine. Leal sighed heavily and said that she thought they should go back home. Letitia was surprised because they had not found a jeweler yet. The young lady said that they would look for a jeweler next time since it was already late, and she thought that her brother would worry if they did not return on time. She looked at her friend with a smile and said that today they would go home and next time they would search together again. Letitia smiled and agreed with the young lady. Some time later, they returned to the estate. Enoch looked closely at the girls and asked how their search went. Leal smiled and said that everything was fine, but unfortunately they still couldn't find the jeweler. Ian smiled and said that he thought she would be more disappointed since she couldn't find anyone. The lady smiled and said that she was exhausted, but one way or another she would find someone. Enoch looked at his sister with a smile since he expected nothing less from her. Letizia, in turn, looked at the young people as they were behaving very nicely. Leal looked at the young lady in surprise and asked why she was standing. She told the young lady to quickly sit down with them. Letizia froze for a moment. She didn't know where to sit since there was free space next to the young duke. She froze for a moment in embarrassment, not knowing what to do. A moment later, she sat down next to the young duke, but she felt a little awkward. Enoch sighed heavily and told the girls not to stay out late as he was worried. After a while, he poured tea for the young lady and handed her a leisurely cup. She smiled and said that they would not be late. She was surprised that he was worried about her, but still noticed that he was a very kind person. Yan looked closely at the young men and said that the appointment ceremony for the Imperial Knights was about to take place. Soon, Leal asked her brother if he was nervous. He smiled and asked what kind of anxiety he was talking about. Leal smiled and asked the young lady if she wanted to go with them. Letitia asked in surprise if she could go with them. Leal smiled and said that of course she could go. Letitia smiled and said that in that case she would also go and celebrate with them. She knew that she might run into her brother there. A moment later, Ian asked his sister if he could look at the designs. She smiled and said that of course he could look, but a moment later he opened a small folder and noticed some kind of contract. The young lady was shocked because she knew that these were not her paintings. She froze for a moment and remembered that she had accidentally bumped into the man. She wondered if she had confused her drawings with the man's documents when they collided. At the same time, the man came to his leader in a hurry with a contract. The man was shocked when he opened it and saw the documents as it was not a contract at all. The man froze for a moment, remembering that he had run into a young lady. A moment later, he apologized to the man as he had bumped into someone on the way, and it seemed they had mixed up the envelopes. In turn, the man was burning with rage as he knew that he needed the documents very urgently. But looking at the design, he thought for a moment because it was not bad at all. He was sure that if the design was improved a little, it would sell well. After some time, he ran out into the street and asked his colleague to wait a little. He asked the man to find out about the drawings when he found the person with whom he had mixed up the documents since he wanted to meet him. At the same time, the young lady was puzzled. She did not understand what to do since she had confused the envelopes with that person. Ian smiled and said that it was already late tomorrow and they could go out and look for that man. He smiled and said that she didn't need to be too upset because they would find him. Enoch looked closely at the young lady and said with a smile that it was time for them to go to their rooms. Letitia looked intently at the young man and asked him to stay for a moment. He looked at her in bewilderment but did not answer. She sighed heavily and asked if it was possible that the young lord had entered the mansion again while she was gone. Enoch sighed heavily and said to the young lady that they were not shy and called each other by their first names, and it seemed like they had a special relationship. Letitia thought for a moment and said that they had been family friends since she was a child. She sighed heavily and said that they had a special relationship. She remembered how he gave her his radiant smile. She remembered how he insulted her, so she wondered when everything had changed. Enoch looked at the young lady intently and said that no one had come. The young lady in turn breathed a sigh of relief. Enoch. Looking at the young lady, he said that he had something to tell her. She looked at him in bewilderment as she did not understand what he was talking about. Enoch said that if someone hurt her, he hoped she wouldn't take it for granted and keep it to herself. He looked at her intently and said that no one dares to hurt anyone, no matter who they choose. Letitia froze for a moment, but in turn, she thanked him with embarrassment. Letitia looked at the young man intently and said that she was no longer Leroy. She looked at him with embarrassment and asked, how about him calling her by her first name? She was embarrassed, looked away from him, waiting for an answer. She didn't know if he would call her by name. A moment later, the young man beamed with happiness and called her by name with a smile, but he still asked if he really could call her that. She froze for a moment in embarrassment, but in turn said that he could call her that. He smiled and said that it would be nice if she now called him by his name. She was surprised and at the same time embarrassed by this, so filled with embarrassment, she asked if he could give her time to get used to this. He looked at her with a smile and said that he would look forward to when she called his name. Letitia smiled and thanked him. As he left, he smiled and wished her good night. But a moment later he turned around and with embarrassment and a delightful smile called her name. Letitia froze for a moment in embarrassment, as she had not expected this, but in her mind she called his name. At the same time, the priest was furious. He could not believe what the Marquess had done because he knew that the young lady did not have the ability to attract misfortune. He shouted that if this were really so, they would all be dead already. The Marquis looked at the priest intently and said that he had a good reason for this. Seos did not understand how good a reason it had to be to throw out a child. The Marquis shouted that he could not allow this child to ruin his family. Seos stood frozen for a moment, not knowing what to answer. The Marquess in turn remembered his daughter since she had previously injured her wrist. The Marquis looked closely at the priest and asked what he should do. After all, he knew that her behavior and her abilities were only doing what she did to tarnish their family. He said that she spent time with the Duke's family, who were known for their bad luck. Seos looked at the man with fury and asked if he was really now blaming Letitia for what happened. The Marquis said that nothing bad had happened since Diana was born. He said that either the child's power really did bring misfortune, or she was too close to the Duke's family. The priest looked at the man closely and said that the young lady's ability did not bring any happiness, and if necessary, he could swear on his name. The Marquis stood frozen for a moment, not knowing what to answer. A moment later, he was taken aback as he heard some noise. At the same time, the young lady was shouting that she was sure that she had handed in her examination paper. The young man apologized and said that they had no choice but to disqualify her. She was shocked and shouted that it was impossible and she would definitely find him. She was furious and screamed that she couldn't help but hand in the paper. He sighed heavily and said that in that case they could sort it out at the academy. She screamed that she was leaving immediately. The Marquis was in shock. He did not understand what could have suddenly happened. A moment later, a knight ran up to the Marquis and said that they had problems with the young master. He shouted that he was young, the gentleman fell from his horse and was seriously injured. The Marquis was shocked as he did not expect anything like this. He ran after the knight in a hurry as he had to check on his son. The knight shouted that the young master was now in his room. The priest, in turn, looked sideways at everything that was happening since he knew that the young gentleman handled the horse perfectly. He knew that the Marquise had injured her hand earlier. Diana also suffered an arm injury. He understood that there had been a lot of trouble in the family lately. He wondered when it all started, but a moment later he was taken aback and wondered if it had all been happening since the day they kicked Letitia out. At the same time, the young lady was slowly walking through the estate, absorbed in her thoughts. She thought about the young man because earlier he told her that he did not want anyone to hurt her. He said that he really hoped that she would not take it for granted and would not keep everything to herself. She wondered what expression she had on her face back then. Letitia was in shock because she didn't understand why everything was different when the young lord called her by her name. She was puzzled and didn't understand why she was even thinking about it. Sometime later, the young lady reported about her friend that they had already returned. Letitia asked her if they were able to find the man and return his documents to him. Liel sighed heavily and said that, unfortunately, they were not able to find him. Liel was excited and at the same time puzzled as they went to the place where she met the man, but unfortunately they did not meet anyone there. Letitia smiled and said that she was sure they would meet him soon since there were important documents and he had to find her himself. Liel sighed heavily and said that it would be very good if they found him. She said that she would like to have some tea and asked her brother if he wanted to go with her. Jan sighed heavily and said that he would better go to his room as he still had things to do. Letitia in turn looked intently at the young man. She looked after him with bewilderment and wondered if something had happened. She saw that he was in a very bad mood. A moment later, she decided to go to him as she was very worried. Ian looked at the young lady in surprise as he did not understand what brought her to his room. Letitia looked at him intently and said that she would like to talk to him and also asked if he had a minute. He was surprised but still said that she could come through. She looked closely at his room as she assumed that he was preparing to become an imperial civil servant. He sighed heavily and said that he did not want anything like that. She looked at him in bewilderment and asked if he wasn't interested. He looked at the young lady intently and said with a smile that it was not that he was not interested in it at all, but rather that he had to do it. Ian sighed heavily and said that compared to his brother and sister, this was the only thing he could do. He said that sometimes he envied his sister, unlike him. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. The young lady in turn looked sadly at the young man, as she understood that they were in the same situation. Letitia wondered for a moment why she was the only one who didn't have abilities. Letitia looked at the young man closely and said that his sister was not doing what she was good at. She was just doing what she liked. Ian looked at the young lady in bewilderment. She smiled and said that, like him, she hadn't found what she liked yet. She smiled and suggested that they find something together that they would like to do. Yang looked at the young lady with a gentle smile and said that he now understood why his sister liked the young lady so much. Letitia looked at him with bewilderment as she was a little surprised by his words. He looked at her with a smile and said that they could try together. He thanked her for her support. Letitia looked at the young man with a tender smile as she saw that he felt better. She knew that she would also definitely find something that she liked. She wanted to find something that she would like. Sometime later, the day of appointment of the Imperial Knights came. Liel ran to her friend with a joyful smile. Liel looked closely at the young lady and asked if she had slept well. Letitia smiled and said that she had slept well, and she also asked her friend if she had slept well. Liel said with a smile that she had been very nervous and had not been able to close her eyes. Liel looked closely at her friend and asked if her brother had arrived yet. Letitia smiled and said that he would arrive soon. Liel looked at the young lady and said that she had forgotten the envelope, so she asked to call her brother so that he would hurry up and she would take Jan with her. Letitia smiled and said that she would go get him. Sometime later, Letitia came into the young duke's room. He smiled and asked for forgiveness because a button had come off his sleeve, and that was why he was so late. The young lady froze in place for a moment in embarrassment. She was shocked because the outfit suited him very well. The young man in turn looked at her in bewilderment. Letizia was taken aback and embarrassed, told the young duke that he had buttoned his shirt incorrectly. She smiled and said that she could help him. He thanked her with a smile. Letitia looked at the young man in surprise as she noticed the bracelet on his hand that she had given him earlier. She said that she thought he might have taken it off by now. Enoch said with a smile that every time he wore the bracelet, only good things happened, so he wore it almost always. The lady froze for a moment in embarrassment as she did not expect such a thing. She was amazed as he always carried it with him. She sighed heavily and said that everything would be better if he took it off. He looked at her in bewilderment and asked if she really didn't like it. She said that it wasn't that at all because it was the bracelet that she gave him, and it suited him very well. He looked at her in bewilderment, but did not answer. But a moment later, he said that he didn't want it. Letitia looked at him in surprise. He smiled and said that he would show off this bracelet, as if telling others that he also had someone who cared about him. She froze for a moment in shock and embarrassment, as she did not expect such a thing. The lady looked away from him in embarrassment and asked what he was talking about. Enoch smiled and asked if she didn't care about him. The young lady sheepishly said that of course she did care about him. Enoch looked at her with a smile as he saw that she was very embarrassed by his words, but a moment later he invited her to go to the ceremony anyway. Sometime later, the ceremony, the knighting, began. Letitia was looking for Enoch in a hurry, but her search was unsuccessful, and so she asked Leal where the young duke was. Leal told the young lady where to look and where her brother was now. A moment later, the young lady clearly saw the young duke in all his glory. The girls greeted the young man with joyful smiles. Leal looked at her brother with a smile and called him, but a moment later she noticed that he turned around. She was a little surprised as she didn't understand where he was looking or who he was nodding to. But after a few seconds, she looked closely at her friend and realized who he was smiling at. She looked at the young lady with a satisfied grin because she knew that there was something between them. Levian looked menacingly at the young man as he did not like this at all. He was furious because the young duke could not take his eyes off the young lady, even during the ceremony. Levian understood that the young lady was looking first and foremost not at him, but at the young duke. Levian Polaya wondered in rage if she really wanted to say that he was nothing to her at all. His assumptions infuriated him. A moment later, Letitia called out to her friend as she noticed a man in the corner. She looked closely at her friend and asked if this was the same man they had encountered last time. The young lady in turn turned her attention to him and, looking closer, realized that it was definitely him. Leal hurriedly shouted to her family that she would come soon. With lightning speed, she ran up to the man and they politely exchanged envelopes. Jan smiled and said that his sister was very restless. The young lady smiled and said that was her charm. After a while, the ceremony came to an end. Letitia smiled and said that it didn't take as long as she thought. Ian smiled and said that he agreed with her. A moment later, the young lady started as she heard her sister's voice. Diana looked at her sister with fury and asked if she was really going to take revenge since she was thrown out of the house. Letitia looked at her sister in bewilderment as she did not understand what she was talking about. Diana angrily asked her sister why she was there. She wanted to know if she was really going to make someone else unhappy. Letitia looked at her sister in bewilderment and asked if she couldn't even come to the ceremony. Diana screamed at her sister that she should just hide in a corner and live quietly so as not to stand out. Diana asked if her sister was going to make the young lord unhappy because she thought she was not good enough for him. Letitia looked at her sister in bewilderment as what she was saying was complete nonsense. A moment later, the young duke came closer to them and told Diana to stop such talk. Diana was taken aback and hurried away. Letitia looked at the young duke in surprise. A moment later, the hall was filled with commotion. Leal, in turn, was in shock. She asked to be given way. She was surprised because she did not understand what had happened since she had only been gone for a few minutes. Ian looked at his brother closely and said that they needed to leave as there were a lot of prying eyes in the hall. Leal looked at her brother with worry and asked what had happened. She told her brother that he had previously informed her that he had some business to attend to after the appointment ceremony, and he should go and settle everything. Diana was in shock. She didn't understand where they were coming from, one after another. Letitia looked at the young man intently and said that she was fine so he could go and take care of his business. Leal were with her. The young man sighed heavily and said that everything was correct, and also asked them to wait a little, and he would return soon. A few minutes later, everyone was staring intently at the young duke. Diana looked at her sister closely and asked if she had really been friends with the young duke. She wanted to know if they were now dead to each other. Leal looked at the young lady sharply and said that she was too rude. She said that one should not be so rude to one's older sister. Diana looked at them with fierce rage and asked what kind of sister this was who had no conscience at all. Ian was shocked and told the young lady not to say such a thing. Diana was furious and did not understand why they continued to interfere. She shouted at the young man that he had no business there and that he should get out of the way while she pushed him angrily. Leal stood up for her brother and told the young lady that it was not nice to be so ignorant and she should stop it immediately. Diana turned furiously on the young lady and told her to get out of the way immediately. Letitia was in shock and didn't understand what her sister was doing. Leal was taken aback and thanked her brother as she almost fell. He managed to catch her in time, but a moment later the young lady looked back and realized that her drawings had fallen apart. Diana walked over slowly and picked up one of the sheets. She asked the young lady with a grin if she was really going to make jewelry. She looked at the young lady intently and asked with a smirk how she could be so childish and stupid. Diana asked if the young lady had already wanted to decorate her pieces with a pink diamond. She mockingly said that the small mine with pink diamonds would soon turn into ruins. Leal was shocked and did not understand what the young lady was doing. A moment later, everyone started whispering as they heard that it had been a long time since ore had been mined from there. There were some diamonds there, but they were all low grade. They had heard a lot of gossip and were sure that the Duke's family was going through hard times. A moment later, the young lady could not bear it any longer and called out angrily to her sister. Diana flinched in surprise. Letitia looked at her sister intently and said with fury that, forcing her to look at this childishness and stupid bracelet, Diana looked at her sister in bewilderment as she did not expect this. Letitia glared at her and shouted that when the young lady succeeded, she would have to apologize to her. She shouted at her sister that she should remember this day well. Emile looked at his sister intently and said that they should leave as they did not need to stoop to the level of young people. Leal was furious and looking at the young man asked what was wrong with their level. Jan called his sister. Leal turned around and looking at her brother said that he himself heard perfectly well what the young man said. Letitia looked at her brother closely and said that he was not putting himself in the best light, so he should not interfere in such a matter and should keep quiet. Diana said with a smirk that her brother said everything correctly. She did not understand how they could expect success with such a level. Diana looked at the young people mockingly and said that if she succeeded, she would certainly apologize. But a moment later, Diana asked what they would do if they failed and only ended up destroying and humiliating themselves. Letitia looked at her sister with fury and asked what she wanted her to do. Diana said that for the fact that their family's reputation had suffered and for the fact that she had humiliated her in front of people, Letitia had to apologize for everything. Diana looked at her sister with fury and said that she should get on her knees. Leal was shocked and asked the young lady if she had gone crazy. Letitia was burning with anger and fury. She did not understand why she should do something like this. She did not understand why she loved a child like Diana, but she knew that the time had come to cross out everything that had been forever. She was well aware of the fact that this relationship would end here, and now she was ready to let it go. She looked closely at her sister and said that she agreed with her. Leal was shocked by her friend's words. Letitia knew that if she failed, she would have to apologize to Diana. She knew she would never regret it because this would allow her to break the meaningless family ties without any regret. Letitia looked at her sister intently and said that if her friend succeeded, she would kneel down and apologize to her. Diana was surprised and did not understand why she would do something like that. Letitia said it was only fair. She asked her sister if she was really so insecure. Diana looked at her sister with a fierce grin and asked who was not confident in themselves. She said that in any case the result would be obvious, but they could try their best. Leal in turn watched them closely. She couldn't understand how they could be so rude to their older sister. Letitia sighed heavily and wondered if she had been too reckless. She knew that everything would be fine, and they just needed to show everyone what they were capable of. The young lady looked closely at her friend as she saw that she was worried. A moment later, she hugged the young lady and said that those people would regret their words, and she promised that she would do everything for this. Letitia smiled and thanked her friend. Leal looked at the young lady intently and said that these were not empty words. She swore that she would not allow her to kneel not in front of such people. Letitia smiled and told her friend that she believed in her, and she was sure that the young lady would succeed. Leal intended to make them kneel before her sister. Ian looked closely at the young lady as he felt relief, and it seemed to him that she had become a little firmer. He thought for a moment as he remembered her brother, for he had heard that the young man was also preparing to become a civil servant of the imperial family. He looked into the distance with a grin as he felt like he now had the motivation he hadn't had for a long time. The man looked closely at the young men and said with a smile that they were now the faces of the renowned knights of the imperial court. He looked at the young people with a smile and said that he had heard a lot about them because they were the most anticipated and promising members of the imperial knights. He hoped that they would enjoy the endless glory together. The young people in turn looked at each other intently. A moment later, the young lord sighed heavily and said that he would be glad if he were not disturbed. He looked intently at the young duke as he did not understand what the young lady saw in him. He looked at the young lady intently as he knew it was too conspicuous. All the aristocrats knew about the engagement between him and the young lady. He was furious and did not understand how the young man dared to lay eyes on someone else's bride. He simply could not allow such a guy to be near her. Enoch looked closely at the young lady as this situation was bothering him too much. He knew that he needed to approach them as soon as possible. He looked at the man closely and asked for forgiveness as he had something to do and wanted to leave first. The man smiled and said that the young man should return home safe and sound. Levian looked closely at the young duke as he noticed that he was heading towards the young lady. Enoch hurriedly approached the young lady and asked if she was okay. He wanted to know what happened. She smiled and asked if he had finished greeting the other knights. Letitia said with a smile that everything was fine with them. He didn't need to worry. But in turn, the young man looked at her with sadness and longing, but did not answer. She smiled and looked away from him, and also said that they really were all right, because his brother and sister were with her. She looked into his eyes with a smile and said that she really was okay. Jan quietly asked his sister if she was serious about getting into an argument. She smiled and asked why he was asking something so obvious. He said with a smile that it was true because they were twins. Yang smiled and said that in that case he would take on her younger brother. He knew that he could raise his level so that the young man would not be able to catch up with him. He was burning with anger and wanted to just destroy him. A moment later, the young men turned around as a lord walked towards them. The young lady looked at the young man in surprise as she did not expect him to approach her. Even though their eyes met for a moment, she didn't think they would ever meet face to face again. She sighed heavily as she realized that there was one relationship that she needed to break off. After his abilities were awakened, he always thought she was pathetic. All she wanted was respect and support from her fiancé. She understood that their relationship had changed a long time ago. She knew that he was no longer the person she knew before. The young man looked intently at the young lady as he wanted to talk to her. At the same time, the Duke quietly whispered something to the young lady. Levian was furious because he understood that she had changed because of the young man. He understood perfectly well that only he knew what she really was. He slowly walked closer to her as he wanted to talk. But a moment later, the young lady simply walked past him without saying a word. He turned around and looked after her in surprise as he had not expected anything like this. The young lord cried out and called for the young lady, but it was all in vain. He reached out to her, wanting to stop her, but all his attempts were unsuccessful. Letitia, in turn, did not know that it was so simple. She felt as if she had been freed from heavy shackles. The only thing that could make her endure this situation right now was her new family. She knew that it was all thanks to them. The young duke looked at the young lady with a worried look and asked if she was okay. She smiled and said that she was fine, and also thanked him for Saturday. Enoch smiled and said that she didn't have to force herself to say that everything was okay. She smiled and said that he should believe her as she really was okay. She smiled and said that because they were there for her, she was able to get through everything calmly. Enoch said that it was very good and her smile encouraged them. Sometime later, they returned back to their estate and had a casual conversation. At the same time, the young lady was burning with rage. She knew that her sister was not capable of anything, but she dared to snap back. Emile told his sister that she did not need to worry so much because the elder sister would not be able to do anything anyway. Diana asked her brother in surprise how long he was going to call her elder sister, because now she was a stranger to them. Emile thought for a moment and remembered the twins that his sister protected, since one of them was Jan Achilles. He irritated him very much, but a moment later, the young man sighed heavily as he knew that worrying about them was a waste of time. After some time, Irene went into their room. Diana said that they had just arrived and also asked her sister what was wrong with her expression. The young lady in turn sadly said that her test paper was missing, and she went straight to the academy but could not find it. Diana was shocked by her sister's words. She asked what about the re-exam, whether it was possible to retake it. Irene sadly said that she was told that this could not be done. Irene told her family that she was told they had no choice but to disqualify her because it was her fault. The young lady was shocked because she knew that her father was looking forward to this, and she could not let her father know about such a mistake on her part. She understood that if her father found out that she had done something wrong, he would be beside himself with anger. Irene was in shock. She didn't know what to do. She was very worried because her father knew about something like this. She knew that she simply couldn't allow this to happen. Diana casually told her sister that she should have taken good care of her tests. Irene, in turn, was shocked by her sister's words. Diana said that if her sister had been attentive, something like this would not have happened. Irene was in shock. She said about her sister that it didn't happen because she wanted it. Diana casually asked what she could do. She told her sister that she should have been careful where and what she put. The young lady, in turn, could not stand it and left the room in a hurry. Diana was shocked and didn't understand why her sister reacted this way, since she herself, through her own stupidity, had lost the exam sheet. A moment later, the young gentleman was informed that he had received a letter. He was delighted because the long-awaited letter had finally arrived to him, but after a few minutes his face changed. Diana looked at him in bewilderment and asked what had happened. He sighed heavily and said that nothing of the sort had happened. The professor wrote to the young man that unfortunately he respectfully declined his offer of a letter of recommendation for imperial service. The young man was furious because he was denied a letter of recommendation. He knew the professor was incompetent and all he needed to do was put his stamp on it, but he didn't do even that. Sometime later, the young lady met with the man to discuss copyright. Looking at the contract, she realized that there was a lot of stuff in there that was incomprehensible to her. Letitia quietly told her friend that she had checked everything, and there were no pitfalls in particular. She had carefully studied the conditions for making a profit. The young lady thanked her friend with a smile for her help. A moment later, the young lady looked at the gentleman intently and asked if he had prepared what they had previously discussed. He smiled and said that of course he had prepared everything. The man said he paid more attention to it than to a regular bracelet. Letitia looked at them in bewilderment as she did not understand what they were talking about. Leal smiled and said that she had prepared everything in advance and asked for it to be made as a gift. She also said with a joyful smile that she had designed it with the young lady in mind. She looked closely at her friend and asked if she liked it. Letitia, in turn, froze for a moment. She was struck by the beauty of this product. She looked closely at her friend and asked if it was okay that she was giving her something so valuable. Leal smiled and said that she sincerely wanted to give it to her. Letitia smiled and said that in that case she would gratefully accept the gift. The man smiled and said that this wish bracelet would be sold from tomorrow, and he really hoped that this business would take off and that they would be successful. The next day they went into town because they wanted to sell their goods. They advertised their goods and called in customers. The young lady, in turn, was a little puzzled and upset, as unfortunately they had not received any response and had not sold anything. Letitia smiled and told her friend that it had only been a few days since they had started doing business. She asked her friend to wait a little as they were supposed to succeed. Leal was shocked as she understood that at this rate her lady would really kneel before the terrible woman. Letitia smiled and asked her friend to calm down as she knew that it was too early to talk about such a thing. Letitia thought about the wishing bracelet for a moment, wondering if there was anyone who might need it. A moment later she saw a familiar man in the distance, and after a while she approached him. The Count smiled and told the young lady that he did not expect to see her in such a place, and he also noticed that they had not seen each other for a long time. She smiled and asked how the Countess was doing. The Count sighed heavily and said that as she knew his wife was in poor health, Letitia looked at the man intently because she knew that everything was true, and she often lost consciousness and was sick. A moment later, the young lady handed the Count a small bracelet and said that it was a wish bracelet that could fulfill anything he wanted because one of her friends had made it with all sincerity. The Count stood still for a moment looking at the bracelet. He said with a gentle smile in the little league that he thought she was still a little lady, but she still grew up quickly and was even worried about them. He said that he would be glad to see her, but his only wish was for his wife to get well soon. As a child, the young lady often visited the county and spent a lot of time with the Earl couple. Madame cared for her as if she were her own daughter. Letizia looked intently at the Count and said that she too would pray for the Countess to recover as soon as possible. The Count looked at her intently and thanked her with a smile for such warm words. In turn, the young lady prayed mentally and asked the Countess to recover quickly as she hoped to see her in good health. Several weeks had passed since the start of their business, but unfortunately they did not receive any profit. The young lady was shocked as she worked hard, but no one wanted to buy anything. Letitia, with a smile, asked her friend to wait a little, and maybe tomorrow everything would be much better. Leal was shocked and wondered if people thought her design was ugly. Jan looked closely at his sister and began to encourage her, but unfortunately he told me the words that his sister wanted to hear. Ian sighed heavily as he realized that he had said the wrong words and realized that she was about to tear him to shreds. Enoch looked at his sister and asked her not to be so upset, because there would be a hunting festival soon, so her sales would definitely go up. The young lady in turn perked up as she knew that the hunting festival was held around this time of year. Letitia froze for a moment, knowing that the festival was coming soon. The imperial family held a hunting festival immediately after the initiation ceremony for the imperial knights to give the new recruits the opportunity to showcase their talents and skills. When the hunting festival began, men would give white roses to women they were interested in, and women would wear a brooch in a color similar to the color of their lover's eyes, so that he could return safely. The young lady happily said that many lovers appear during this period. Enoch in turn thought for a moment about hunting. A moment later, the young men looked closely at the girls, not understanding where they had suddenly gone. Letitia said that she would like to take a walk along the shopping street. Sometime later they came to a shopping street. Letitia smiled and said that it seemed like they had put out a lot of beautiful things, because the hunting season would soon begin. Leal, in turn, looked at all the beautiful things with shining eyes. A moment later, Letitia noticed a small brooch. She stared for a moment at the small brooch, which was magnificent. A moment later, she looked away from the beautiful brooch and told her friend that they could go further. Leal looked at the lady with bewilderment, but still agreed. Leal looked closely at the brooch as she understood what her friend wanted. Leal, looking at her friend's tracks, wondered if it was all because she didn't have money because of her family's work. Leal looked at the young lady with confidence and firmly decided that she would buy this brooch for her. She walked next to her sister and understood that she would buy her hundreds of brooches as soon as she sold her bracelets. Sometime later, they informed their relatives that they had already returned from their walk. The man looked closely at the young ladies and said that they could pass. They looked at the gentleman in surprise as they did not expect to see him. The man smiled and shouted with a joyful smile that he had come to them to tell them good news, as they had many orders from noble ladies. They were shocked and couldn't believe his words, but he shouted and kept saying that the bracelets had become very popular. They were puzzled and didn't understand how this had happened. Madame looked closely at the Countess and said that she had become worried when she heard that she was not feeling well. She asked the Countess how she was feeling now. The Countess looked at her friends with a smile and thanked them for worrying about her. She smiled and said that she was fine. A moment later, the ladies turned their attention to the Countess as she had a lovely bracelet on her wrist. The Countess said with a smile that it was a wish bracelet that her ward had given her. She said with a smile that it had fulfilled her wish. The ladies said that he was too modest to wear it, but the Countess said with a smile that if he looked like that, he carried great value. They looked at her in surprise and asked what she meant. The Countess said with a smile that the girl gave him Haysun, hoped that she would get better as soon as possible. She said with a smile that this wish was so wonderful that she could not help but wear it, and since she put on the bracelet, her body became healthy. Everyone was shocked because they did not expect to hear anything like this. The Countess smiled and told all the ladies that she had been diagnosed and told that it would be difficult for her to recover, but after receiving the bracelet, she felt surprisingly better. Everyone present was shocked by this news. For some time afterward, the ladies discussed this bracelet as they knew that it sounded ridiculous and childish. Madame sighed heavily and said that the Countess's reputation could suffer if she continued to talk such nonsense and wear such cheap clothes from the market square. A moment later, the ladies began to whisper among themselves as they wanted to know where the Countess had acquired this bracelet. The lady was shocked as it seemed to her that the others were very interested in this bracelet. She looked at them in surprise and asked if they were really going to buy a bracelet like that. The ladies looked around at each other and said that they were just curious and hadn't even thought about buying something like that. They looked at the Marquise intently and said that it was very offensive when she thought such things about them. Sometime later, the young man froze in place in shock as a flood of customers rushed towards him. He was shocked and did not understand why such a large influx of noble aristocrats had descended upon him. At the same time, the Marquise was very nervous. He knew that the Count was known for having a lot of money. He did not understand why he came to him. A moment later, he told his subordinate to let the Count in. Count Exile looked intently at the Marquise and, having greeted him, asked for forgiveness for coming to him without warning. The Marquise looked at the Count with bewilderment and asked why he suddenly decided to come to him. The Count smiled and said that he had heard that the Marquis had recently bought a mine and started his own business. The Marquise sighed heavily and said that it was precisely because of this matter that he was very busy. The Count smiled and said that he would be even busier as he wanted to invest in it. The Marquis was very surprised. He did not expect such a thing. The Marquis shouted that he was grateful to the Count, and if he invested in this business, it would be a great support for him. The Count bowed and thanked the Marquis for agreeing. The Marquis understood that he was very lucky, but he did not understand what the catch was. He did not think that the Count had not heard that this business had been failing lately. He understood that no matter how he looked at it, it was only beneficial for him. The Count in turn knew that thanks to the wish bracelet, his wife had become much healthier, and this was the only thing he could do to repay the young lady for her kindness. She hoped that this would at least make her a little happy. At the same time, the young ladies, this bracelet, because they knew that there was no one who had not worn a bracelet recently. They knew that it was very difficult to obtain this decoration because aristocrats bought it almost in bulk. The young lady in turn was shocked, and she did not expect that her idea would be so successful. She thought that she was in for a failure, but everything turned out much better. Letitia looked closely at her friend and asked with a smile if it wasn't more difficult now to find those who didn't have them. Leal was shocked because she realized that everyone really was wearing the bracelet she made. Letitia looked at the young lady in surprise as she was a little upset. A moment later, Letitia asked her friend if she was about to cry. Leal was very touched by this situation and hoped that it was not a dream. She said that she still could not believe it. A moment later, the young lady looked at her friend and said that it was all thanks to her. Letitia looked at her in confusion as she didn't understand what she was talking about. Leal smiled and told her friend that she was the one who designed the bracelet, but Letitia gave her the idea about the wish. Letitia smiled and told her friend that she thought it was all thanks to her efforts. A moment later, the young Duke approached them and said with a smile that his sister had tried very hard, but the young lady had also had a hand in it. Enoch said with a smile that this was the result of their common hard work, so they should acknowledge it. He smiled and said to the young lady that she was quite talented and had excellent abilities. Leal, with tears in her eyes and embarrassment, shouted that she would try even harder and do something even better in the future. Ian looked at his sister closely and said with a smile that she was ugly when she cried. Lady told her brother to calm down, but he said with a smile that she should not cry as everything was getting much worse. The young people in turn looked intently at the brother and sister as they were happy for them. A moment later, Leal shouted that they had to go somewhere. At the same time, Diana was closely watching the young girls. She looked at the lady closely and asked what it was. The young lady smiled and asked Diana if she didn't know what it was. She said with a satisfied smile that this bracelet has been very popular lately. They smiled and told Diana that she would also want to buy it, as it reminded them of their childhood when they played with flowers. They said that the design was very nice, but what they liked most was that it could grant a wish. They were well aware of the fact that it might just be superstition, but they liked it and hoped that the bracelet would grant their wish. The young lady was furious because this art had become popular among the youth. She approached the girl and asked her to let her take a closer look at the bracelet. The young lady thought for a moment and said that she had heard before that a lady from the Achilles family had made it together with her sister. Another lady said that she had heard that her sister's name was Lady Leroy, but after their words they were taken aback and looked intently at Diana. Diana, in turn, was burning with anger and fury. She knew that this simply could not be. She could not believe that a childish and unsightly bracelet was in fashion. She did not understand how and why everything turned out exactly this way. She remembered the quarrel with her sister, and her sister said that if this work was successful, she should apologize to them and kneel down. Then her sister angrily asked her if she really doubted her victory. Diana was now burning with rage as she knew that she would have to kneel, but in turn she knew that she would never do that. Letitia looked closely at the young lady and asked if they couldn't just spend time together today. Liel said that she was waiting for an apology first. Letitia said that she would like to congratulate her and buy her something delicious. Liel looked at the young lady intently and said that when she spoke like that she could not refuse her, but she still wondered how long Letitia would continue to call her Lady Achilles. Liel told her friend that they were close enough to call each other by their first names. Enoch and Letitia exchanged glances. Ian asked them in surprise if they really already called each other by their first names. Letitia smiled and said that they should quickly go and take a walk. The young people were shocked and shouted that this was a betrayal. At the same time, Mark was experiencing rage. He did not understand what his daughter was thinking, since she somehow could not even follow the piece of paper properly. Irene was trembling with fear. She said that this did not happen because she wanted it to. The Marquise shouted to his daughter that he did not want to hear or see her face, so she should immediately return to her room. The young man looked intently at his sister and asked her to calm down and stop crying. She was shocked and said that it seemed like she was so stupid that she could lose the exam sheet. Emile looked at his sister and said that next time she would have better luck, so she should calm down and stop crying. Next time she would succeed. She was furious and shouted at him not to talk about it so frivolously because she tried so hard to be the best. She screamed that she didn't want her father to hate her, so she tried her best. She screamed at her brother not to try to comfort her because they didn't know anything. Irene, with tears in her eyes, told her brother that their father had been proud of him all his life, so he could not know how she felt. The young man in turn looked intently after his sister, but did not respond to her words. With the speed of lightning, the young lady ran into her room. She cried quietly, sitting behind her door. She was in shock because she understood that she would have to catch up again with all her relatives. With lightning speed, she picked up the book and opened it as she knew she had a lot to learn. But suddenly the young lady froze in place as she remembered her older sister. She once told her that if she had a hard time, it was okay and she didn't need to try so hard. Then Letitia told her with a joyful smile that it was not worth sacrificing oneself for someone else's reputation. Irene, in turn, froze in place for a moment. She didn't know what she was thinking about. She didn't understand what kind of self-pity this was. It was that this time she couldn't make a mistake under any circumstances, and she had to be perfect in everything. She understood that she had to do everything to make people proud, and she always had to be the perfect daughter for everyone in order to be loved. A moment later, the young lady with lightning speed handed her brother a document. He looked at her in surprise as he did not understand what she had brought. She said with a smile that this is not all, and in fact this is only a small part. He stood still for a moment in amazement, for he saw that it was his duty. Taken aback, he thanked his sister for thanks to her, he was able to bear his burden. She looked at everyone with a joyful smile and said that they should not be surprised as this was not the end yet. Leal, with a joyful and contented smile, handed her brother her pocket money and said that he could use it to buy books for the Imperial Service exam. Jan was surprised and puzzled as he saw the gold coins that sister gave him. He pounced on her with a joyful smile and thanked her. With tears in his eyes, he thanked his sister and told them that he would work very hard. She smiled and said that he must keep that promise. The young people looked closely at their brother and sister as they were happy for them. Leah looked closely at the young lady and said that she also wanted to buy something for her. Letitia was shocked because she didn't expect this. Lael looked at the young lady intently and told her to call her by name. A moment later, she grabbed her friend's hand and said that they also needed to go faster. Letitia was shocked, as she did not expect this. Letitia looked closely at the young lady and asked where they were going. Leal smiled and told her friend that she should just trust her and follow her. Letitia was surprised and at the same time puzzled, as she recognized this street. A moment later, they came to the brooch she had been looking at so intently, Letitia was surprised as she realized it was the same brooch shop. Leal told the young lady with a joyful smile that it was now her brooch. Leal told her friend that she had looked at this brooch so hard last time that she had already thought that she should definitely buy it for her. Letitia was shocked and did not understand how she deserved something so expensive. She told her friend that she had earned the money given to her with difficulty and could not just spend it on something fabulous. The young lady said with a satisfied smile that she didn't know anything and that was a fair price. Leal said with a smile that, as she said last time, she came up with the idea of the bracelet, but her young lady gave her the idea with the wishes. Letitia looked at her friend with embarrassment but was unable to answer. A moment later, she thanked her friend for the wonderful gift. Leal said with a smile that, since they were going out for a walk, they could stop by a few more establishments. Leal asked with a happy smile why they didn't buy suitable outfits for the hunting festival. Leal said with a joyful smile that she would like to see her friend in an innocent style, a sexy style, or the style of the main character of the novel. She was delighted and knew that everything would look absolutely fantastic on her friend Letitia. In turn, sighed heavily and asked if maybe I should try any of this on. Letitia smiled and said that the brooch was enough for her, and now they could go home. At the same time, Diana was slowly leaving the store. A moment later, they collided near the entrance to the store. Levian walked slowly along the long corridor, absorbed in his thoughts. He did not understand how it all began. He was puzzled because he knew that Letitia had always been on his side. He didn't understand when everything went wrong. He froze for a moment, knowing she had changed. He was furious because he realized that the young man had influenced her changes. Levian was sure that his Letitia had changed because of that unlucky Achilles. He was burning with anger and fury because he knew that he would definitely return her to where she belonged. Diana looked at the girls with a smirk, as she did not expect to see them on a walk. Leal looked at the young lady in bewilderment and asked if she'd eaten something bad. Letitia smiled and said she thought so. The thing is, it's a very busy street. Leal looked at the young lady intently and said she thought it was because she felt awkward about apologizing. Diana looked at the girl in bewilderment and asked what nonsense she was talking about. Diana sighed heavily and asked if this salon really didn't even care about its reputation. The maid looked at the young lady in bewilderment. Diana said that they were ruining the view by sticking to the window. Leal was furious. She did not understand who the young lady in front of her was, since she ignored the title of the duchy. Diana said with a smirk that the duke who had just been knighted was also a duke, and strictly speaking she didn't think there was any need to fulfill promises made to the princess, a family that couldn't even hold a knighting ceremony or a title succession ceremony. Leal in turn was shocked by the young lady's words. Diana looked at them intently and said with a fierce mockery that if they had nothing more to say then they might as well step aside, since her carriage should arrive soon. Leal was furious, but Letitia told her friend to calm down and be patient. Letitia looked at her sister intently and said she knew she wouldn't apologize. She knew this better than anyone else, for her sister was one of those children who are generous to themselves. Letizia looked at Diana intently and said that on the other hand, she was grateful to her for doing what she always did, showing her true self. Letitia said that if her sister had sincerely apologized, she would have doubted, but now she was not going to let go of that hand that she had barely managed to catch. Diana was in shock. She did not expect anything like this from her sister. Letitia looked at Diana intently and asked why she didn't break the habit of controlling her abilities when she was angry. Diana stood frozen for a moment as a rain of flower petals showered her. Letitia said that every time her sister used her powers, the maids complained about how hard it was to clean up the aftermath. Diana, in turn, angrily pushed the maid away and said that if she had finished packing all the purchases, she should bring an umbrella immediately. Letitia looked intently at her sister and said that she was saying this because she was separately worried about her. Letitia looked at her sister intently and said that no matter what anyone said, her ability was so useless that it was not much different from hers. Diana was shocked. She shouted at her sister, but she just left. Letitia told her sister not to flatter herself. Even running away is a kind of struggle, and fighting, it is a kind of disrespect for oneself. Leo looked closely at Diana and said that this ability suited her perfectly. A moment later, everyone began to whisper among themselves, as they knew that it would be a hassle for them to clean up after using magic. Sometime later, Diana was furiously smashing dishes in the estate. The maid looked at the young lady intently and asked for forgiveness. Diana looked at the maid with cold fury and asked how dare they think that her flowers were a nuisance. The maid was shocked by her mistress's pressure and, trembling with fear, said that it was a great honor for everyone to remove her petals. Diana exhaled with a joyful smile and said that naturally that's how it was. She said with a satisfied smile that she would present this honor to them personally, so they should clean the room and she should meet her father. The maids looked at their mistress intently, as they did not expect anything like this. Diana smiled and said that everything was correct and she was the one because of whom their family was reborn. It all started with her birth. She understood that her sister envied her because no hopes were ever placed on her. She knew perfectly well that in any case she would always be the main character. At the same time, the young lady was burning with rage and anger since Diana had previously ignored them. She said that although Letitia had put her in her place, she still felt offended. Leal said in all seriousness that the next time she saw Diana, she would simply hit her. Leal approached the young lady and said that now was not the time to laugh and that she needed to be shown. Letitia looked at the young lady in bewilderment, as she did not understand what was being discussed. Leal looked closely at her friend and asked where they were now and what event was going on soon. Letitia was taken aback and said that they were now in a busy shopping area and that a hunting festival would soon be taking place. The young lady in turn, with a bright smile, said that everything was correct and they would show everyone because Letitia would be the main character of the hunting festival. Leal looked at the young lady with a joyful smile and told her not to be shy and to just follow her. Sometime later, the young lady also tried on various outfits. Leal said with a satisfied smile that her sister was very beautiful in all her outfits, and she didn't even know what to choose. A moment later, the young lady turned around and asked her sister if she had already managed to change her clothes. A moment later, the young ladies froze in shock when they saw Letitia in a new outfit. In one voice, they shouted that this outfit would definitely amaze everyone at the festival. Leal looked closely at the young lady and asked who she was going to give the brooch to. Leal asked her friend not to tell her that she was going to give this brooch to the rude man who came to them last time. Letitia looked closely at the girl and said that of course this was not true, but she had one person to whom she wanted to give it. Leal asked her friend with a satisfied smile who it was. Letitia, with an embarrassed expression on her face, told her friend that this was a secret, even from her. Leal looked closely at her friend as she guessed who they were talking about, but at first she wanted to pretend that she didn't know it, but she was still interested. Sometime later, the young lady knocked on her sister's door and said with a smile that she was entering the room. She looked closely at young Letitia and said with a smile that she was beautiful. Letitia smiled and asked her friend if she looked good, as it was the first time she wore designer clothes. Leal smiled and asked the young lady what she was even talking about. She said that at this hunting festival there would be no one more beautiful than her sister. Letitia smiled and thanked her for her ladyship and asked if it was time for them to go. Sometime later, the ladies greeted Lady Achilles. They were surprised, but still waited for her. A moment later, the lovely ladies noticed that she was not alone. Leal asked with a smile how they had chewed all this time. Letitia smiled and greeted the lovely ladies. Leal looked closely at the girls and asked with a smile what they meant when they said they were waiting for her. The lovely ladies asked about her bracelet, the wish she had made earlier. They wanted to know if she had any more plans to do something similar, since they have been very popular lately, and everyone just said that they wanted to give them to each other. Leal looked at the young ladies in surprise and confusion, as she did not understand what they were talking about. The lady smiled and asked her if she really didn't know this, because wish bracelets were considered the best gifts because they were cute and brought good luck. Leal stood still for a moment, wondering if all her suffering and efforts had really been worth it. Letitia looked closely at the young lady, as she was very glad that she had gathered up the courage to start communicating with others and talking about her brainchild. But a moment later, Letitia turned around because she heard someone's familiar voice. She looked intently at the Count, who looked at her with tenderness and warmth. The Count smiled and said that they had not seen each other for a long time, but she looked wonderful and he did not even recognize her at first. She smiled and thanked him for such a pleasant compliment and also asked how the Countess was. He said with a snowy smile that she had become much better in recent days. She had even started taking short walks. The Count said with a smile that his wife really wanted to meet her, so she should come visit them when she had time. The young lady said with a smile that she was also looking forward to meeting her. He said that he had recently visited her father, and he was very sorry that they had not been able to properly talk about business, and he had not been able to ask about her. The Count said that he had been there for quite a long time, but that day she was probably busy and could not see him. The young lady hesitated, but a moment later said that she had been kicked out of the family, so she no longer lived there. The Count froze in shock on the spot as he did not expect to hear anything like that. He looked at her closely and asked where she lived now. She smiled and said that she was now being looked after by the family of Duke Achilles, and she was very grateful to them and was now in great debt to them. The Count was shocked that she was now living with the Duke, but more importantly, he did not understand how this could have happened at all. A moment later, the young lady looked away and noticed Enoch. She looked intently at the Count and asked for forgiveness because she had urgent business. She said that she would go. The Count shouted after her, but it was all in vain. The young lady ran out into the street with the speed of lightning and shouted because she wanted the young Duke to stop. He turned around and looked at her with a tender smile as he noticed that she had arrived. Letitia smiled and said that she wanted to give him something before the hunt began. She looked at him intently and said that he should wait a little. After some time, she presented him with a beautiful brooch. He was surprised as he did not expect such a thing. Letitia looked at the young man with a gentle smile and said that she really hoped he would return safely. She also said that she did not want to make him feel uncomfortable with her gift because it was a small thing compared to what she could do for him. Enoch looked at the young lady closely and said that it was not so. It would be good for him if he mattered. The young lady in turn looked away from him. She did not know what to do since her heart was beating very hard, and it seemed to her that it would soon jump out of her chest. Enoch looked closely at the young lady as he noticed that her ribbon had loosened a little. Enoch asked if she could turn her back to him for a moment. She was embarrassed but still agreed. A moment later, he took a small flower-seeing ribbon from his pocket and wove it into her hair. A moment later, he touched her hair tenderly and said with a smile that it made sense. She froze in place with embarrassment as she did not expect anything like this. She was in shock as he had just touched her hair and kissed it. A moment later, he smiled and said that the hunt would soon begin and it was time for him to go. Enoch looked at the young lady and said that the outfit given to her suited her very well, and he felt as if he had met a goddess. The young lady stood still for a moment, unable to say anything. She did not know what he meant when he said such things. At the same time, the lovely ladies were talking to each other as they were interested in who would be the winner of this year's hunting festival. The young lady said with a smile that perhaps Sir Earl would win. The other lady held her as he looked well and fought well for the Marquis. The young lady smiled and said that it was so since they did not consider any other candidate. They praised the young man with tender smiles because they knew that he was magnificent in everything. They were filled with embarrassment and said that he was really cool. Diana was shocked. She did not understand how they could speak like that in front of his fiancé. She knew that they could admire him as much as they wanted. But a moment later they started talking about Lord Achilles because they knew that he was also a strong contender for victory. They heard that he was on par with the Marquise in the knight's exam, and they also said that their business had been on the rise lately. The young lady said that despite the fact that they had no money, his family was one of the founders of the empire. Diana looked closely at the girls as he did not like what they were talking about at all. She looked at them intently and said with fury that no one knew how things could change. The young ladies looked at her in bewilderment but said nothing. A moment later, Diana was taken aback because she saw her sister. She was in shock. She did not understand what was wrong with her sister because someone might have thought that she was going hunting. But a moment later she looked in surprise at Levion, who was staring intently at her sister. She was furious because she didn't understand why he continued to pay attention to her sister when she was around him. Burning with rage, Diana wondered if he still had feelings for her. At the same time, the young lady was immersed in her thoughts. She was puzzled because she did not know what the young man meant by his words. She wondered if he really liked her. The young lord approached the young lady and asked if she would not even greet him. Now, Letitia was taken aback, as she did not expect to see him. She looked at him in bewilderment as she did not understand why he approached her. A moment later, the young man handed her a rose and told her to accept it. Letitia sighed heavily and informed the young man that he no longer had to do anything like that. Levion looked at her intently and asked if she refused because he was her ex-fiancé or because she had another man in her heart. Letitia was taken aback by shock. She did not understand what he was talking about. Levion sighed heavily and said that as it was announced on the capital's bulletin board, rumors of their breakup were already circulating. He asked why she didn't first sort out her reputation instead of looking for a new suitor. Letitia glared at him and said that all the knights of the Empire protect women, and the hunting festival is an event that they enjoy, but it seemed to her that he was the one who forgot not only about etiquette towards women, but also about the valor of a knight. Levion was taken aback for a moment as he had not expected such a thing. He said that he was simply worried that she had not received flowers because she did not have a fiancé. She looked at him with fury and asked if it was not enough for him to humiliate her with such a prank. She said that she did not need his sympathy. Letitia said that whether she flirted with other men, whether her reputation suffered was no longer his business. The young man was burning with rage. He shouted at the young lady that she should not have given him the brooch. With the speed of lightning, he threw the rose away and grabbed the young lady by the hand, pulling her towards him with great force. She was in shock, didn't understand what was happening at all, and so she screamed for him to let her go immediately. Levion shouted at the young lady and asked if she knew that he was now engaged to Diana. She was shocked and didn't understand what he was even talking about. The young lady froze in place for a moment in surprise, as she did not expect to hear anything like that. But a moment later she laughed wildly. Levion froze in place in surprise as he did not expect such a reaction. He looked at her intently because he did not understand why she suddenly burst out laughing. A moment later she asked him for forgiveness. He looked at her with bewilderment, as if he did not understand what was happening. Letitia laughed and told the young man that they were very well suited for each other, so she asked him to stop pestering her. She said with a smile that it seemed like her father had really gotten around to it quickly. Letitia looked closely at the young man and said that he was really lucky because he got the beauty of the century as a bride. Letitia said she wasn't joking when she said they were right for each other. He was confused and didn't understand why she was so calm. He froze in place as he did not understand whether she really meant what she said. She looked at the young man with a radiant smile and congratulated him on his engagement, and also said that he could give the rose to his new bride. Levion froze in place in shock. He was struck by her words. Letitia said that she unfortunately was not sure that her sister would like this rose since it was already dirty. Moments later, she turned around and said that it was time for her to go. The young man asked her to stop, but it was all in vain. He looked after her intently and said that if she continued in the same spirit, everything would be over between them. But the young lady in turn was not going to stop. Levion couldn't stand it and shouted that everything would be over between them if she left. Levion understood perfectly well that they could return to what was, if she closed her eyes to everything as it was before he called her, but it was all in vain. But a moment later, the young lady turned around and asked if that was all he wanted to say. Letitia said that everything had ended between them long ago. The young man froze in his tracks. He had not expected anything like this from her. She looked at him intently and said that now everything would be different. The young man was stunned by her words. The Marquis looked closely at the priest and said that thanks to the Count's investments, the family business had begun to revive again. His wife was healthy and his children were all grown-up health, so this was a reason to celebrate. A moment later, the priest could not bear it any longer and angrily slammed his glass of wine down on the table. Seos looked at the Marquis with cold fury and asked what nonsense he was talking about. He was shocked, since the priest was the one who congratulated the Marquis on the birth of another daughter, but he now pretended that she never existed. Seos asked the Marquis if he had really forgotten his pride as an imperial Marquis. The Marquis sighed heavily and told the priest that he had told him many times that Letitia's expulsion from the family was not only for the Marquisate, but also for his children. He said that if she had not been the cause of all the rumors from the very beginning, then everything would have been different. The priest could not stand it and told the Marquis that he would be in his residence for some time, so he did not want to see him again. As he left, the priest told the Marquis to remember that no parent would live well. Having dared to abandon his child, the Marquis stood still for a moment but said nothing. The priest was very worried about the young lady, as he knew that she was a very sensitive person. A moment later, he stopped as he saw the young gentleman. Emile bowed and greeted the priest and also asked for forgiveness for not being able to greet him earlier due to his busy schedule. Seos smiled and said that it was no big deal, as he had previously heard that the young man was busy with the Imperial Civil Service exams and family matters. He was also busy. The young man looked at the priest intently and said that he was just about to come to him to give him a letter. He said that he did not know who sent it because there was no seal on it. The priest looked at the letter in bewilderment. He saw that the paper and wax in the envelope were familiar to him. He knew that the letter could mean two things: either the child had been found or his body had been found. At the same time, the young lady was staring intently at the cute rabbit. Letitia looked closely at the rabbit, as it was the only one the Imperial Knight had managed to catch at the hunting festival. A moment later, she raised her head and saw a young man. He looked at her intently and said that when they caught him, he was unable to kill him. She looked at him in surprise and asked what was wrong with the rabbit. Letitia said that she thought that mercy should be closer to the knight's heart. Enoch smiled and said, "Young lady," that he was very glad that she liked the rabbit because it was his gift to her. She was embarrassed by such a gift, but in turn said that the rabbit was very cute. She was shocked and did not understand why she stuttered. He looked at her closely, as he saw her genuine embarrassment. Enoch smiled and said that it was so, and he thought it was the cutest thing in the world. The priest looked closely at the young man and asked how his sister was doing. Emile looked at the priest in surprise, as he assumed that he was talking about Diana. He knew that they had all eaten together yesterday. He said that if he was talking about Irene, then she had recently left for the academy. Seos looked at the young man closely and said that he knew where his sisters were, but he was now asking for Letitia. The young man froze for a moment and looked intently at the priest, as he did not know what to answer him. He sighed heavily and told the priest that he had given blessings and instructions to numerous children, but that did not mean that he was the parent of all these children. He said that just as the gentleman could not be his father, so Letitia could no longer be his sister. The priest was shocked, as he did not expect to hear anything like this. Emile Tverdo said that he was now speaking as the eldest son, who would become a Marquis in the future, even if she was once a member of his family. Now she was just an outsider who had been erased from the register. Seos sighed heavily, for he knew that the young man was a very smart child, and he hoped that he would have at least a drop of common sense. But it was all in vain. The priest realized that he had nothing more to say to his young man and quickly left. He understood that both father and son were hopeless fools. The first night of the hunting festival was held with great ceremony in the banquet hall of the Imperial Palace, an event where men and women exchanged roses and brooches and danced together. Letitia told her friend with a gentle smile that she thought her hairstyle, which she had done for her for this celebration, was really beautiful, and she had the feeling that everyone in the banquet hall was looking only at them. Leo looked at her friend with a smile and asked, what if she was not mistaken? Letitia looked at her friend closely and told her not to tease her, as she was very curious because she did not even let her look in the mirror. Leia looked at her friend closely and told her that she promised not to look in your mirror until she met her brother. Leal sighed heavily and asked where her brother, who had only caught a rabbit, was going. Letitia stood still for a moment. She was very worried and wondered if something had happened. She was wondering who he would dance with because she had given him her brooch, but never received a rose from him. At the same time, Enoch was running in a hurry towards the young lady. He was puzzled, as he had been delayed longer than he thought. He knew that his sister would look at him with fierce rage and ask how he dared to make the young lady wait for him. He was sure she would say something like that. A moment later, he was taken aback and looked around as he heard someone calling him. Enoch looked at the Count with bewilderment, as he did not expect to see him at all. The Count bowed and asked forgiveness for the late congratulations. He greeted him as the new Duke. Enoch smiled and said that everything was fine, since he had been very busy since the death of the Duke's spouses. Enoch looked at the Count and said that it was a great honor for him to meet the Count on this great day, but the young man was surprised as he did not know what the Count wanted from him. The Count looked at the young Duke intently and said with a smile that he would like to make him an excellent offer. He asked the young man to give him a little of his time. The Count looked at the young Duke intently and said that he would get straight to the point, as he would like to invest in the pink diamond mine. Enoch Graff, who would appreciate his proposal, but the quality of the ore was not important, so he doubted that this was the right decision. The Count sighed heavily and said that he already knew about the state of the ore. Enoch looked at the Count in bewilderment as he did not understand why he was going to invest. The Count sighed heavily and asked the young Duke what his relationship was like with Letizia. Enoch looked hard at the Count and said that he had not answered his question, and he saw no need to answer his. The Count said that he had heard by chance this afternoon that the Lyceum was visiting the Duke, and despite his tactlessness, he had asked the Duke such a question because the child was a benefactor to him. Some time ago, his wife's condition was getting worse every day, and he looked at his spouse with tears in his eyes, but a moment later he was distracted as he heard the voice of a young girl. He looked at her with a smile as she came to him. She handed him the marigolds with a joyful smile and said that she had brought them for the Countess because they were now in full bloom, and she was sure that she would soon feel better and get out of bed. The young lady asked the Count not to worry too much. The Count looked at the young girl with tears in his eyes. In those days when everyone only dreamed of taking the place of the next Countess, the young lady was sincerely worried about his wife. The Count smiled tenderly and said that as if in response to her sincerity, his wife felt better on the days when the young lady came to visit them. He sighed heavily and said that it was therefore a shock for the couple to learn that the Marquise had struck the young lady off the family register. Enoch looked at the Count intently but said nothing. The Count looked closely at the young man and asked if he were given the opportunity to help Letitia what his actions would be. Letitia in turn sighed heavily, as she had not seen the young Duke throughout the entire party. A few minutes ago the young lady said with a smile that she needed to go to the restroom. Letitia was shocked because she didn't want her friend to leave her alone. But in turn, Letitia hoped that Leal was okay, since she had not been seen on the horizon for a long time. The young man looked closely at the young lady and asked with a smile why the wife of the goddess of spring looked bored at the hunting ball. Letitia looked at the young man with surprise and bewilderment. He looked at her with a smile and greeted her and also introduced himself and said that his name was Hugo Fernand. He took her hand with a smile and kissed it slowly, asking if she could tell him her name. Letitia was surprised and at the same time embarrassed. She said that her name was Letitia. He looked at her in surprise but said nothing. He smiled and asked if she was the same lady from the rumors from that Marquise family. Letitia smiled and said that it was all true. She noticed that he was one of those people who had everything written on his face. Hugo said with a joyful smile that she was much more beautiful than the rumors said. He said that he was very sorry that they had not met earlier. He smiled and said that it must be fate that they met. For a moment they felt some tension. At the same time, a young Duke approached them who was burning with rage. The young lady was a little surprised. She did not understand what kind of aggressive atmosphere it was, because she knew that this was a banquet hall and not a training ground. The young man with a gentle smile told the young lady that it was a great honor for him to meet the goddess of spring. He looked at her with a smile and said that he really hoped she would have a good time, and a moment later he left. The young lady looked at him with a gentle smile but did not answer. A moment later, Letitia turned to her companion and asked if he knew the young man. Enoch sighed heavily and said that the young man was also a knight, but he did not know him very well. A moment later, they were taken aback as the music began to play. Enoch looked at the young lady with a gentle smile and asked if she would dance one dance with him. Letitia smiled tenderly at him and agreed to his proposal. A moment later, surrounded by dancing, he asked the young lady what she had spoken about with the young knight. She smiled and said that he only asked her name. Enoch said that men often ask the name of a woman they are interested in when they first meet her. She was surprised because he simply asked her name. He smiled and asked if she didn't remember since he had once asked her name. Too, Letitia was confused. She wondered if he had been interested in her back then too. At the same time, a young lord entered the hall. He looked intently into the distance as he noticed that Letitia was dancing with the young Duke. He was furious because as a result she decided to choose the young man and not him. Diana looked at the young lord with a smile and said that they were well suited to each other. Diana smiled and asked if it was time for the family to get together again. Levion looked at the young lady with bewilderment and asked if she was really thinking about their engagement. Levion was furious and shouted that this was complete nonsense because he was her sister's fiancé. She looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. She was asking the young man if she had an older sister. She asked with a smirk if he really meant the one who was kicked out of the family. A moment later, the young lord could not bear it any longer and called out to Diana in anger. She froze in place in shock as she had not expected such a thing. He turned around and as he left told her to watch her words as it was very important to him. Diana looked closely at the young man because she realized that he did not at all understand that she was much better than her incompetent sister. Diana was furious because her sister was getting on her nerves even after she was thrown out of the family. She looked intently at Letitia, who was having a good time, as she was not at all happy with it. Enoch looked at his companion with a tender smile and said that it suited her very well. Letitia looked at him in bewilderment as she did not understand what he was talking about. He smiled and said that he was talking about a white rose. She froze for a moment because she had flowers in her hair. Now she understood what her friend had said earlier, that she should not look in the mirror. She was shocked and at the same time very confused because now everything fell into place. Letitia looked at her companion with a bright and tender smile and said that she was very glad. Enoch, in turn, was taken aback for a moment and froze in embarrassment. Letitia looked at the young man with bewilderment as she saw that he was feeling a little unwell. Enoch looked away and asked the young lady to wait a little as he wanted to bring something to drink. At the same time, the young lady was blushing with embarrassment since she did not even imagine that she could receive a white rose. She understood that the party was really interesting. A moment later, she walked up to her sister and said they needed to talk. Letitia turned around and saw her sister, who was furious. Diana looked at her sister with a grin and said that she must be very happy since she was walking around with a white rose in her hair. She mockingly asked her sister where she got the money for the outfit after she was kicked out. Letitia was shocked and shouted to her sister that it was no longer her concern. Diana asked her sister what she was doing here now since she had neither a title nor money. She told her sister that in their family she had curried favor with her father for pennies, and now she had decided to join the Duke with a useless wishing bracelet. A moment later, Diana turned around as the young lady came closer to them and said with a smirk that they were having quite an interesting conversation. Diana looked at the young lady in bewilderment as she did not know who she was. The young lady looked at them intently and said with a grin that this was very good since she just had questions. She came closer to Diana and asked why she told her maid to buy a wish bracelet while talking about their uselessness. Diana was taken aback because she did not expect to hear anything like that. The young lady smiled and said that she just heard it in passing. The lady told Diana with a grin that everyone said she was worried because she couldn't buy the bracelet made by her sister who had been struck off the family register. Diana was shocked and didn't understand where the young league had heard such nonsense. A moment later, everyone turned their attention to them. Diana froze for a moment as everyone began to talk about how the Marquise children did not get along with each other. Everyone understood perfectly well that they, despite the fact that the young lady was kicked out of the family, they were sisters and they should have gotten along with each other. Diana looked at the young lady sharply and said that she did not want to make any unnecessary noise at the hunting festival, so it was time for her to leave. As she was leaving, Diana said to her Naledi that she would regret something about what had happened today. A moment later, Letitia's companion approached her and asked her anxiously what had happened. At the same time, the young lady said with a grin that it was very funny. The young people looked at her in bewilderment as they did not understand what she was talking about. She smiled and said that she thought they had exaggerated a little when they said that, but the rumors did not lie to everyone. She looked at her intently, but her lady asked if it was true. Letitia looked at her in bewilderment, as she did not understand what she was talking about. The young lady asked Letitia if it was true that she had the ability to make others unhappy. Letitia was taken aback. She didn't know what to answer. Enoch, with the speed of lightning, blocked Letitia with his body, and looking at the young lady, said that he thought it would be better if she left. Letizia in turn looked intently at the young lady and said that she did not know what rumors had spread in the capital, but she could swear before His Majesty the Emperor and God that she did not have the ability to endure misfortune. The young lady looked at Letitia with a soft smile and said that it was a great pity. She looked at the young lady closely and said that she would just leave today, but she came here because she was curious to know what kind of person she and her sister were. Letitia looked at the young lady in bewilderment as she did not understand why she needed such information, but she in turn did not answer her.